She was on the floor of a bathroom stall, knees against cold tile, fingernails digging into her own palms, and the only sound she could make was the sound of a person drowning on dry land. He shouldn't have been there. No boy was supposed to be in that hallway, let alone that room. But Damien Moretti had never once in his 17 years on this earth done what he was supposed to do. And that afternoon, in the girls' restroom on the third floor of Blackwood Preparatory Academy, that particular flaw would change both their lives completely. If you've been waiting for a story about two people who never should have found each other, stay until the end, hit like, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Damien Moretti walked into Blackwood Preparatory Academy for the fall semester of his junior year, 3 separate conversations stopped cold in the main corridor. Not because he was particularly tall, though he was. Not because his uniform was pressed with a precision that made everyone else's look like laundry, though it was. They stopped because of what lived behind his eyes. Something flat and watchful and patient in the way that only dangerous things are patient. He was 17. He had watched a man beg for his life in his father's study when he was 11. He had not looked away. His father had made sure of that. The Moretti family occupied a particular tier of New York society that the city's wealthiest citizens pretended did not exist while simultaneously courting it at every opportunity. Vincent Moretti ran 4 legitimate enterprises, 2 investment portfolios, 1 shipping conglomerate, and 1 operation that never appeared in any filing with the state of New York. He was photographed at charity galas. He sat 3 pews from the mayor at civic events. He smiled in the way that men smile when they have already decided the outcome of every room they walk into. Damien had inherited the jaw, the patience, the calculation. He had not yet decided what else he was willing to inherit. Blackwood was the kind of school where legacy admissions were never called legacy admissions, where the cafeteria served meals that cost more per plate than a public school's entire weekly lunch budget, and where students learned early that cruelty had a dress code. You didn't shove anyone into a locker here. You destroyed them with smaller, cleaner instruments. A look held a half-second too long. A rumor allowed to travel uncorrected. An invitation never extended. Charlotte Whitmore had been learning the particular grammar of this cruelty for 2 years. She arrived at Blackwood on a scholarship, the kind the school advertised in brochures but quietly resented in practice. Her grades were the best in her class. Her financial aid application had been reviewed by 3 separate committees before approval. She wore the same uniform as everyone else, but wore it differently, the way people wear clothes when they bought them once and intend to make them last. She was quiet. She was careful. She kept her eyes slightly lowered in the hallways, not from weakness, but from the same animal instinct that keeps small creatures from making unnecessary eye contact in open spaces. None of it was enough. It never was. Madison Caldwell had identified Charlotte as a target within the first week of sophomore year with the unerring precision of someone who had been trained since birth to identify vulnerability. Madison's family had donated the East Wing Library. Her mother sat on the board. Her father's name was on a plaque in the administrative hallway, in gold letters that had been repolished twice since installation. Madison moved through Blackwood with the specific confidence of someone who understood that the institution existed to serve her comfort, not the other way around. Charlotte had never done anything to Madison Caldwell. That was almost beside the point. What she had done was exist in a space Madison considered exclusively hers, and do it better than Madison at the things Madison could not buy her way into. The academic awards, the scholarship distinctions, the quiet respect of the faculty that Madison's donations could purchase but not manufacture. The campaign was gradual, a snicker in the hallway, a comment about scholarship students left audible at exactly the right volume. A group project where Charlotte's name somehow failed to appear on the final submission. Small things. Legal things. Things that left no fingerprints. Damien watched all of it. He watched most things at Blackwood without involving himself. That was its own kind of power. The knowledge that he could intervene in anything and chose not to. The entire school felt the weight of that choice, even when he said nothing. He had watched Madison's campaign against Charlotte Whitmore the same way he watched most things, with the particular attention of someone cataloging information without yet knowing what he intended to do with it. He had also, in the earliest weeks of the semester, contributed to it, not directly. He had never spoken to Charlotte, but he had not stopped it. He had walked past the corridor incident in September when Madison's group surrounded Charlotte at her locker and spoke to her in that particular tone, the one designed to feel like helpfulness while delivering maximum damage. And he had kept walking. He had seen the color drain from Charlotte's face in that moment, had clocked the way her hands went still at her sides, like she was concentrating very hard on not shaking. He had kept walking. He told himself later that it wasn't his concern. He had learned to tell himself that about many things. The third week of October arrived with a cold front that swept in off the Hudson and turned the campus grounds gray. The trees along the main path had gone yellow and rust-colored, and the wind moved through them with a sound that was almost like paper tearing. Damien was crossing from the East Academic Building toward the administrative offices when he heard it. Not a scream exactly. Something worse. The sound a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make a sound and failing. It was coming from the third-floor girls' restroom. He stopped. He stood in the hallway for 3 full seconds. The reasonable thing, the correct thing, the thing 17-year-old boys at elite preparatory schools did, was to find a female faculty member or a guidance counselor or anyone except himself. He knew this. He calculated it quickly and completely. Then the sound came again, and something in the back of his chest responded to it in a way that bypassed calculation entirely. He pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty except for the last stall. The door was closed but not latched. It swayed slightly inward, and through the gap he could see the edge of a shoe. White canvas sneakers, the kind that had been scrubbed but not replaced, the rubber sole coming away at the left toe. He recognized them. He had noticed them, unconsciously, in the hallway for weeks. "Hey!" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I'm coming in." No response. Just breathing. Rapid, shallow, the specific rhythm of someone whose body has convinced itself it is dying. He pushed the stall door open. Charlotte Whitmore was on the floor with her back against the partition, her knees drawn up and her hands pressed flat against the tile on either side of her like she was trying to hold the floor in place. Her face was gray-white. Her eyes were open but not present. They were somewhere else, looking at something that wasn't in this bathroom, in this school, in this year. Her chest was heaving in small, jerking movements that weren't moving enough air. Damien Moretti had seen people in crisis before. He had seen his father's enforcer hold a man's shoulders while a physician treated a gunshot wound in his father's kitchen, the man making sounds remarkably similar to the sound Charlotte was making now. He had seen his sister Elena locked inside herself for 3 days after the worst of what her ex-husband had put her through, sitting on the floor of her apartment, unable to explain to anyone what had happened because the words had stopped working. He knew what this was. He knew it the way you know things you've been forced to learn. He dropped to one knee in front of her, not touching, just present. "Hey, Charlotte." He used her name deliberately, watched her eyes for any flicker of recognition. "You're in school. You're in the bathroom. You're on the floor and you're cold, and I need you to listen to my voice." Nothing. The breathing continued its terrible staccato. He had watched a therapist do this with Elena once, through a partially open door, not knowing he was there. The memory surfaced now without his permission. He sat down fully on the tile beside her, close enough that his shoulder was an inch from hers, and said, "In for 4 counts. With me. 1, 2, 3, 4. He breathed it, audibly, slowly, the kind of breath that takes effort to hear. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out for 4. Nothing. Then, barely perceptibly, something shifted. Again. He said it quietly, without urgency, without the particular flavor of panic that adult voices took on in these moments that somehow made everything worse. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Her breathing snagged, tried to follow, failed, tried again. He stayed beside her and counted. The floor was cold through his trousers. The fluorescent light above them had a faint flicker at the edge of its frequency that was almost but not quite perceptible. Somewhere down the corridor, a locker slammed, normal world sounds. He let them come in, used them. "You hear that? Lockers, between classes. You're at school." He kept his voice at exactly the same register. Not soothing, not performative, just level. Matter of fact. Anchoring. "Your name is Charlotte Whitmore. You're 17. You're in the girls' bathroom on the third floor, and in about 4 minutes the passing period ends and someone's going to need to come in here, so I need you to breathe with me. Something in that last part, the practical indignity of it, perhaps, seemed to reach her in a way the rest hadn't. Her eyes moved, found his face, stayed there. He counted again. She followed. Imperfectly, raggedly, the breath still hitching at the top like it couldn't decide whether to continue, but following. 3 minutes later, she could speak. "Get out," she said. Her voice was wrecked, raw, the voice of someone who had been screaming somewhere that no one could see. In a second, now. She pulled her knees in tighter, turned her face away from him. "Nobody can see you in here." "Nobody's seen me. I'll hear if anyone comes." He didn't move. "Are you going to pass out on me?" "No." "You sure? Because you were pretty far gone when I came in." "I said no." Her jaw was clenched. He could see the muscle working in it. "All right." He pushed himself to his feet, extended a hand downward without comment. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she took it, and he pulled her up, and neither of them said anything about the fact that her grip was shaking slightly on his palm. She let go immediately when she was standing, turned to the sink, ran cold water and pressed her wet hands against her face, her neck, the inside of her wrists. He watched her in the mirror, kept his expression neutral. "How long has that been happening to you?" he asked. "That's none of your business." "I'm not asking to put it in the school paper. I'm asking because I've seen it before, and the first few times are usually the worst." She looked at him in the mirror. Something complicated moved across her face. 9 years, she said finally. Not to him exactly. More to the mirror, or to herself, or to the plain fact of it. He did not react visibly. Internally, something rearranged itself. 9 years. She'd been 8 then. Whatever it was, she'd been 8 years old when it started. "Anyone know?" he asked. "No." "Nobody in the school?" I said no. She turned off the water, pressed her hands flat on the edge of the sink. Her composure was reassembling itself in real time, which was either impressive or heartbreaking depending on how you looked at it. Probably both. "Nobody knows, and they're not going to. I'm not going to tell anyone." "I don't need your promise. I need you to walk out of that door and pretend this didn't happen." Damien looked at her for a moment. She had turned to face him now, arms crossed, chin set at an angle that he suspected had taken years to develop. That particular configuration of body language that said, "I dare you to see anything in me except someone in complete control of their situation." It was a posture he recognized. He had worn it himself in rooms where his father's colleagues tested him. "I'll walk out," he said. "But I'm not pretending." She opened her mouth. "Not pretending it didn't happen," he clarified before she could object. "Not carrying it around like something I know about you that you don't know I know. That's not what I meant." He paused. Chose the next words carefully, which was not something he usually needed to do. "I meant I'm not pretending I don't know what I saw," which was someone who's been carrying something alone for a long time. Charlotte stared at him. The composure held, but something behind it shifted slightly. A hairline thing. Almost invisible. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't." He held her gaze for another second, then walked to the door, pushed it open without looking back, and stepped into the empty hallway. The bell rang 6 seconds later. He walked to his next class with his hands in his pockets, and the memory of her grip on his palm, shaking, and the words 9 years moving through his mind like something he was going to need to sit with for a while. He sat with it for the rest of the day. Damien Moretti had been taught by his father to evaluate people quickly and accurately. Vincent Moretti called it reading a room, but it was more than that. It was reading the specific gravity of a person, the weight of what they were carrying, what they would do under pressure. You needed that skill if you were going to run what Vincent Moretti ran. You needed to know who would hold and who would break and who was already broken and didn't know it yet. Damien had gotten very good at it, good enough that he usually didn't find it interesting anymore. Charlotte Whitmore was interesting, not in the way that people at Blackwood were interesting, not as a status object or a social calculation. Interesting in the way that things that shouldn't exist do sometimes exist, defying the conditions that should have made them impossible. She had been carrying a 9-year-old panic disorder through a school that treated her as a target in a building full of people with every resource available to them, and she had done it invisibly and alone. Not because she wasn't struggling. He had seen the struggle with his own eyes on that bathroom floor, but because she was, in some fundamental and unacknowledged way, genuinely formidable. He thought about his sister Elena. He thought about the way Elena had once said to him, in a hotel room 3 years ago when she was finally leaving her husband, that the worst part wasn't what had been done to her. The worst part was not being seen, going through it, and having the world act as though nothing was happening. He sat in AP chemistry and thought about these things and did not write down the molecular formulas on the board, which was fine because he had already memorized them. Charlotte spent the afternoon in her usual corner of the library and did not look at him when he passed through on his way to the administrative offices. He did not look at her either. They both pretended, successfully, that the bathroom had not happened. That night, she went home to the Whitmore house in the Morningside Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, a brownstone that was nice without being extravagant, the kind of house that had been maintained carefully by people who understood that what they had was more than some had, but less than many. And she sat at her desk for 2 hours without opening any of her homework. She had a journal. She had kept it since she was 9, 1 year after the accident. The therapist she had seen briefly at age 9 before her father decided the expense wasn't sustainable and the sessions ended had told her to write things down. She had kept the habit long after the therapist was gone. The current journal was a composition notebook, the kind you buy in bulk, black and white cover, spiral binding. She had filled 14 of them over 8 years. She opened it now and wrote for a long time. And what she wrote about was the bathroom floor and the count of 4. Breathe in, hold, breathe out, and the specific quality of a voice that had not panicked in her presence, and how strange it was that the only person who had ever guided her through an attack without flinching was the one person at Blackwood she had spent 2 years carefully avoiding. She didn't know what to do with that, so she wrote it down instead and closed the notebook and went to bed at 11 and didn't sleep until 3. The following week arrived without incident. Damien did not speak to her in the hallways. She did not speak to him. This was not different from the week before, except that now they were both aware of not speaking to each other, which was different from simply not having spoken. On Wednesday, Charlotte fell asleep in AP Literature. This was not an event she could have prevented. She had been awake since the previous Thursday with the particular fragmentation of sleep that came with the bad stretches. 2 hours here, 45 minutes there, long plateaus of lying in the dark with her brain generating images she did not choose and could not stop. The crash. The rain on the windshield, her mother's hand on the steering wheel, the specific angle of the headlights coming through the passenger window in the second before impact. The thing her mother had said in the car before it happened, after Charlotte told her what she had found on her father's phone. The expression on her mother's face in that moment, which Charlotte still could not name precisely, but which had been the truest and most devastating thing she had ever seen on another person's face. She fell asleep with her cheek on her open textbook at 9:47 in the morning. She was back in the car by 9:48. It started the way it always started. The rain, heavy and gray, the kind that made the highway shimmer. She was in the passenger seat. She was 9 years old. She had just said the words, and she could hear her own voice saying them, and she could not stop herself from saying them, even though every part of her that was 17 and sitting in AP Literature knew what came next. Her mother made a sound. Not a word. The sound a person makes when the floor falls out beneath them. The windshield blurred. Her mother's hands moved on the wheel. Then the lights. Charlotte came back to AP Literature with a scream that she heard from the inside and knew immediately was real and too loud and impossible to take back. The classroom went still with the specific paralysis of 23 teenagers confronted with something that exceeded their social frameworks for response. Mrs. Hartley stood at the front of the room with her dry erase marker suspended mid-stroke, face frozen in an expression that was trying to be composed and wasn't. Charlotte's hands were on her desk. She was breathing in the wrong rhythm. She could hear herself breathing. She could hear everything. The ambient hum of the air system, someone's pen against a notebook, the faint sound of a lawnmower somewhere outside. She heard something else too. A sound she recognized before she identified it. The low, precise click of a camera shutter function on a phone. Madison Caldwell sat 3 rows to Charlotte's left with her phone angled openly at face height, recording. She wasn't hiding it. That was the point. She wasn't hiding it because she had already calculated correctly that the teacher's paralysis would last long enough for her to get what she needed. "Oh my God," Madison said, to the room rather than to Charlotte. Not loud, just audible. "Is she having an episode again?" The word again was the instrument. It implied history. It implied a pattern. It implied everyone had known and been suffering through it collectively. "Does someone need to call her a doctor?" said one of Madison's friends. Priya, whose father ran a hedge fund and who had practiced this particular blend of false concern since 7th grade. Someone laughed. Quietly, the way people laugh when they think they might get away with it. Charlotte's hands were flat on the desk. She could feel the wood grain beneath her palms. She was trying to find the count. In for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold! But the room was too loud and too bright, and Madison's phone was still angled at her, and the laugh had just happened, and the scream was still in her own ears. The door opened. Not a teacher. The wrong direction. Not from the hallway door through which Mrs. Hartley had come, but from the door to the adjoining corridor, the one that connected the two wings of the building. It opened with a sound of intent, not accident. Damien Moretti walked in. He was not in this class. He had no reason to be in this building at this time. Later, Charlotte would understand that he had been passing in the adjacent corridor and had heard her through the wall, which said something about how loud she had been that she did not want to examine too carefully. He walked the length of the classroom in 11 steps. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Madison's phone dropped to her desk. He didn't look at Madison. He didn't look at anyone. He walked to Charlotte's desk with the same particular quality of motion he moved with everywhere. Unhurried, precise, the walk of someone who had never once in their life needed to rush to assert authority. And he stood beside her chair and looked at her and said quietly enough that only she could hear, "Can you stand?" She looked up at him. Her breathing was still wrong. "I've got you," he said. Not asking. She stood. Her legs were unsteady, and she knew it and hated it, and he put one hand on her back, not gripping, just present, a point of contact. And she did not fall. Then he did something that the classroom would talk about for the rest of the semester. He picked her up, not dramatically, not the way people are carried in films, with urgency and performance. He simply looked at her for a half second, made a decision, and put one arm behind her knees and one behind her shoulders and lifted her. And she didn't stop him, which later she would have a complicated relationship with admitting. She was not a small person. She was 5'6", lean but not fragile. He carried her as though she weighed nothing, which was not precisely accurate but was close to accurate, and he walked back toward the door with exactly the same quality of unhurried precision with which he had walked in. The classroom watched in complete silence. Mrs. Hartley opened her mouth, closed it. Madison Caldwell sat with her phone face down on the desk and did not move. Damien walked Charlotte out of AP Literature and into the corridor and set her down gently against the wall and stood in front of her and waited while she breathed. "Count with me," he said. She counted. Her voice was barely there, just breath shaped into numbers. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. Again. Again. She was crying. She didn't know exactly when she'd started. At some point between the classroom and here, the tears had simply begun, without drama, just water running down the sides of her face, in the way that happens when the body has been holding something too tightly for too long, and finally, in the presence of something it recognizes as safe, lets a small amount go. She did not wipe them. She kept counting. After 4 rounds, she said, "I have to go back in there." "No, you don't. I have an exam on Friday." "That's Friday." She pressed the back of her head against the wall and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was plain institutional white with long fluorescent panels, and she stared at it until it was just a ceiling and not anything else. "Everyone saw," she said. Yeah, she appreciated in that moment that he didn't try to reframe it. A lot of people would have said something like nobody really noticed, or they'll forget by tomorrow, or variations on that particular brand of comfort that was actually about making the person offering it feel better rather than the one receiving it. He just said yeah, because it was true. Madison filmed it, Charlotte said. Something changed in his face, not dramatically, just a subtle tightening around the jaw, a shift in the quality of stillness. "I know," he said. She looked at him. There was something in the way he'd said it, flat, present, the 2 words carrying a weight she didn't entirely understand yet. She pushed herself upright from the wall, steadier now. The corridor was empty. The ambient sounds of the school came in from the edges. Distant voices, a locker somewhere, the perpetual hum of a building containing 2,000 people in motion. Normal world sounds. She used them. "My stuff is in there," she said. "I'll get it." "You don't have to, I'll get it. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her without flinching, without the particular awkward quality that most people brought to this kind of moment, the quality that made her feel like a problem requiring management. "Fine," she said. "Thank you." He nodded, turned, and went back into the classroom. She stood in the corridor and breathed. Inside, he collected her textbook, her notebook, her pen, and the composition journal that had slipped halfway out of her bag and landed partially open on the floor beside her chair. He picked it up. He meant to close it immediately. He did close it, after a second, but in that second, his eyes had moved across the open page by reflex. The reflex of someone who had been trained to absorb information quickly in any form, and he read 6 lines before his brain registered that he should not be reading them. He closed the journal, put it in her bag, slung the bag over one shoulder, and walked out. He stood beside her in the corridor and held the bag out. She took it. He did not say anything about the journal. She did not know he had seen it. They walked to the clinic in silence, which was 3 buildings away and usually took 4 minutes, and took 6 today because she was still not quite right on her feet, and neither of them rushed. In the clinic, she sat on a cot that crinkled slightly with a paper cover, and the nurse checked her vitals with the brisk efficiency of someone who had dealt with anxiety episodes before, and Charlotte answered the questions in the tone she used for these situations. Calm, cooperative, minimizing, presenting the version of herself that required the least intervention and could leave the fastest. Damien sat in the chair by the window and said nothing. The nurse stepped out for something, and he looked at Charlotte and said, "How long since you've slept?" She paused. The honest answer was complicated. "A few days," she said. The answer that was closer to true but still not precisely it. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the clinic window, the campus grounds were November gray and still, the last leaves moving in a slow and purposeless wind. "You need to see someone," he said. "I saw a therapist when I was 9. That was 9 years ago. I know how time works." He didn't react to the edge in her voice. "There are people who specialize in what you're dealing with, not general practitioners, actual trauma specialists." She looked at him. "How would you know that?" A pause, small but present. "I know people," he said, which was true in a number of ways he did not elaborate on. Charlotte looked out the window. The wind moved through the bare branches of a tree near the path, and the branches moved like fingers, and she watched them because they were simpler than this conversation. "It's expensive," she said. "I know." I didn't say you had to pay for it." She turned back to him. The look on her face had sharpened into something wary and specific. "What does that mean?" He held her gaze. "Steady. It means don't make decisions about your options before you know what they are." She stared at him. The nurse returned before she could respond, and the moment passed, and when the nurse had finished and Charlotte had signed the release forms and gathered her things, she looked at Damien once and said, "We're not friends." "I know," he said. "Don't follow me home." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. "All right." She walked out. He sat in the clinic chair for another minute and thought about the 6 lines he had read in her journal before his conscience had caught up with his training. He had not meant to read them. He was going to need to carry the fact that he had, carefully and quietly, in a way that didn't do her further damage. The 6 lines had been, "The thing about the accident is that I was the one who told her. I found the messages on his phone and I told her, and she was driving and she made a sound like something breaking inside her. And then the rain was on the windshield, and then the lights were there, and then there was nothing, and when I woke up, there was glass in my hair, and my mother was gone, and it has been 9 years, and I have never once said this to anyone, that I was the one who told her." Damien sat in the clinic chair with that knowledge and did not know what to do with it. He had grown up in a world where information was power, and power was currency, and you carried both things carefully because both things could be used in either direction. He had never been the kind of person who sat with information and felt grief about it. He felt something close to grief about this. He had also, the previous Thursday, told his sister Elena about the girl in the bathroom. Not in detail. Not anything Charlotte had said, just that he had helped someone through a panic attack, and it had reminded him of her. And Elena had said, over the phone from her apartment in Seattle, "What did you do?" And he had told her. And Elena had been quiet for a moment and then said, "Damien." She said it the way she said his name when she wanted him to pay attention. "You're going to have to decide what kind of person you want to be about this one." He had thought she meant whether he was going to tell anyone what he'd seen. He understood now that she had meant something larger. He stood up from the clinic chair and straightened his jacket and walked back into the gray November air of the Blackwood campus. And somewhere on the other side of the building, Charlotte Whitmore was walking toward the library with her composition journal in her bag and a secret she had been carrying for 9 years that was no longer technically entirely her own to carry. She didn't know that yet. He walked to his car in the student lot, sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, and called his father. Vincent Moretti answered on the second ring. "I need something," Damien said. "What kind of something?" "A name. Best trauma specialist in the country. Private practice, discreet, someone you can arrange access to without the normal channels." A pause on the other end. Vincent Moretti had not become what he was by missing the subtext in conversations. "For who?" Vincent said. "Someone who needs it." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll have a name for you by tonight," his father said. Then, "Damien." "Yeah." "Whatever this is, be careful with it." Damien looked through the windshield at the gray campus, at the bare trees, at the building where Charlotte Whitmore was probably sitting in the library right now, pretending to read, and actually staring at words without seeing them, the way she sometimes did when she thought no one was paying attention. "I know what I'm doing," he said. He was not entirely sure that was true. He started the engine and sat for another moment, and thought about a girl on a bathroom floor and 6 lines in a composition notebook, and the way she had said 9 years into the mirror like she was confessing it to herself for the first time. And he thought about his sister's voice on the phone, and he thought about the specific quality of Charlotte Whitmore's grip on his hand when he pulled her up, the way she'd let go immediately, as fast as possible, like contact was something she'd lost the habit of. His father texted him a name at 6:47 that evening, Dr. Margaret Aldrin. The number attached had a Connecticut area code. He saved it to his phone and stared at it for a while, and then he opened a new note and typed out the name and the number and printed it on the Academy's printer the following morning, and folded it into a small square and put it in his jacket pocket, and thought about when to give it to her and how. He was still thinking about it 4 days later when Madison Caldwell walked into the cafeteria during lunch period on a Tuesday and stood at the center of the room and did what she did. The cafeteria at Blackwood seated 300. It was full. Madison stood near the salad bar, close enough to the center of the room that she could be seen from most angles, and she looked at Charlotte, who was sitting alone at a corner table with a tray and an open textbook, and she made a sound. It was a high-pitched squealing noise, followed by a second sound, a prolonged scraping crash, produced by Madison's friend Jenna dragging a chair deliberately across the floor while Priya simultaneously slammed a lunch tray down on the table next to Charlotte. Charlotte's head came up, and Madison, with perfect deliberateness, made the sounds again. The squeal. The crash. Looking directly at Charlotte while she did it. Her expression pleasant, her manner that of someone doing something entirely innocent, and the sounds coming out of her mouth were exactly, precisely, the sounds of tires on wet pavement and metal meeting metal and glass breaking. The cafeteria did not immediately understand what it was watching. Then it did. A ripple of comprehension moved through the room, followed by the specific, uncomfortable laughter of 300 people who knew something was wrong and were laughing anyway because laughter was easier than intervention. Charlotte's textbook was on the table. Her tray was in front of her. Her hands were flat on the table and she was not moving. Her face was the face of someone being pulled under. Damien was across the cafeteria. He saw it. He put down his fork. He stood up. And in the 300-person cafeteria, the sound of Damien Moretti's chair scraping back was somehow louder than all the laughter, and the laughter stopped before he had taken 2 steps. He walked toward Madison Caldwell with no expression at all on his face, which was worse than any expression he might have worn, and every table he passed went quiet in sequence, like lights going out. Madison's smile wavered. She held it. She was not someone who backed down easily. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment with the particular quality of attention that made most people immediately review all of their recent decisions. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a question. It barely inflected upward enough to qualify as a sentence. Madison walked with him. The door to the adjacent corridor closed behind them, and on the other side of it, Charlotte Whitmore sat alone at her corner table with her hands flat on the tabletop, and her breathing in disarray. And the cafeteria was utterly, completely silent, and nobody moved for a long moment. And then someone quietly picked up their fork and went back to eating, and the sound of ordinary lunch resumed. Charlotte pressed her palms harder against the table. Counted. 4 in, hold, 4 out. She didn't know what was happening in the corridor. In the corridor, Damien stood close enough to Madison Caldwell that she had to look up at him, and he spoke quietly enough that there was no possibility of being overheard. And what he said was measured and unhurried and contained within it, like a blade in cloth. The specific information that Madison Caldwell's father's investment portfolio had a significant exposure to a particular series of real estate development loans that were themselves underwritten by a financial instrument managed by a holding company that was, if one followed the chain carefully enough, connected to the Moretti organization's legitimate enterprises. He laid this out without drama. He told her that his father made 1 call per problem. He told her that he had not yet asked his father to make a call about this problem. He told her that what happened next was entirely her decision. Madison stood very still for a moment. She was intelligent. Genuinely, unfortunately, intelligent in the way that some cruel people are intelligent, which was what had made her so effective at the specific task of making Charlotte Whitmore's life smaller and harder. She understood immediately what she was hearing, and she understood immediately what she was not hearing, which was any ambiguity at all. "I was just having fun," she said. He looked at her. She stopped talking. "Go finish your lunch," he said. She went. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went back to the cafeteria and did not look at Charlotte, and sat back down at his table and finished his own lunch, because the specific mechanics of what he had just done worked better when they were allowed to operate invisibly. And he had learned from his father that the most powerful demonstrations of power were the ones that required no spectacle. Charlotte, across the cafeteria, looked up once and found him sitting at his usual table with his usual expression, eating. She looked back at her textbook. Her hands had stopped shaking. That evening she wrote in the composition notebook, "Something happened today, and I don't know how to account for it. I don't know how to account for him." She closed the notebook and went to sleep and woke up at 3 a.m. from the crash, the same as every night, but this time, the panic attack that followed was shorter than usual, and she counted herself through it alone, in the dark of her room, and got back to sleep by 4. She did not know that the composition notebook was now, in a small but permanent way, no longer just hers. She would find that out in 4 days. And when she did, the careful and tentative architecture of the thing that was beginning to exist between herself and Damien Moretti would crack open in a way that neither of them had prepared for, and she would say things to him in the corridor outside the Academy's East Wing that she had never said to anyone, and he would stand there and take all of it without moving because he knew he deserved every word. But that was 4 days away. Tonight she slept, and the composition notebook sat closed on her desk. And in a different part of the city, Damien Moretti stared at the ceiling of his room and turned over the 6 lines he had read like stones, examining what was underneath them, the weight of what a 9-year-old girl had carried for 9 years, on the belief that the worst thing that had ever happened to her was her fault. He thought about his sister. He thought about Charlotte's voice in the clinic. It's expensive. He picked up his phone, texted the Connecticut number his father had given him. "My name is Damien Moretti. I'd like to arrange a consultation. Discretion is essential." The response came back within the hour. "I know who your father is. I'll have my assistant contact you tomorrow." He put the phone down, lay back, looked at the ceiling. In the morning, he was going to have to figure out how to give Charlotte Whitmore something she needed without her knowing how he'd arranged it, and without triggering the particular quality of fierce self-sufficiency she wore like armor, and without letting her know yet what he had read. Because she wasn't ready to hear that yet, and he wasn't ready to have earned the right to have read it. He was going to have to be careful. He was going to have to be patient. He was, for possibly the first time in his 17 years on this earth, going to have to learn something he had not been taught. Outside his window, the city was its usual nighttime self. Noise and light and the perpetual motion of a place that never fully stopped. And somewhere across that city, Charlotte Whitmore was asleep. And the thing that had been set in motion in a bathroom on the third floor of Blackwood Preparatory Academy 3 weeks ago was still moving, quietly and without announcement, toward something that neither of them could yet fully see. The assistant she sent the text to in the dark of her room didn't answer until morning, which was fine because she hadn't expected an answer and wasn't sure why she'd sent it. She'd written, Dr. Margaret Aldrin, Connecticut. Do you know this name? It wasn't a question. She'd framed it as a statement because asking felt like conceding something. Damien's response came at 6:14 a.m., before she'd gotten out of bed. Yes. She stared at that single word for a long time. Then, how? His response took 4 minutes this time. I'll explain if you let me. She put the phone face down on her nightstand and got up and showered and dressed and ate half a piece of toast standing at the kitchen counter and did not pick the phone back up until she was on the subway. And by then she had decided that she was not going to let him explain anything without first understanding exactly how his name had ended up in the same sentence as the best trauma specialist in the country, whose hourly rate Charlotte had looked up the previous evening and whose waiting list she had also looked up, which was 14 months long, and who did not, according to every public-facing piece of information available, take new patients without a referral from another licensed clinician. She found him in the East Corridor before first period. He was at his locker, not looking at his phone, not talking to anyone. He rarely talked to anyone before 10 a.m., she had noticed. In the peripheral and involuntary way she had been noticing things about Damien Moretti for 4 days. He closed his locker and turned and found her standing 3 feet away with her arms crossed, and her expression doing the thing it did when she had already organized her position and was waiting for him to catch up. Explain, she said. He looked at her. Now? Yes, now. We have 4 minutes before first period. Then talk fast. He held her gaze for a second. Then, I called her office. My father gave me the name. Charlotte processed this. Your father? Yes. Vincent Moretti gave you the name of a trauma therapist. He has connections to a lot of people in a lot of fields. He made a call. She stared at him. The corridor was filling up around them, students moving in both directions, the volume climbing toward its pre-bell peak. She was aware of people glancing at them, at the specific fact of Charlotte Whitmore standing in close conversation with Damien Moretti, which was, she understood dimly, the kind of thing people would notice and discuss. She didn't move. Why? She said. Why what? Why did you ask him? Why does any part of this involve your father? Why are you doing this at all? What do you want from me? Nothing. He said it without hesitation. Flat. No qualifications attached. She looked at him. She had a good internal censor for lies. 9 years of living in a house with a man who had restructured his entire emotional presentation around the management of guilt, had calibrated it finely. The censor was not going off right now, which was its own problem, because if he wasn't lying, then she had to accept the alternative, which was that he was doing this for no transactional reason. And that was a category of behavior she didn't have reliable templates for. I don't accept things from people, she said. Not things like this. I know. So you understand why I'm telling you this isn't going to work. I understand why you're saying that. Those are the same thing. They're not, he said, and the bell rang, and he picked up his bag and looked at her once more and said, think about it, and walked away. She stood in the corridor for 3 seconds after he was gone, which was 2 seconds longer than she had any reasonable excuse for. She thought about it for the rest of the day with a portion of her brain that she would have preferred to use for other things. The problem was not that she didn't want help. She had wanted help for a long time in the abstract, theoretical way you want things that seem structurally impossible, like wanting to not have the particular brain chemistry you were born with, or wanting a childhood back that ended on a rain-soaked highway 9 years ago. The wanting was not the problem. The problem was the mechanism of it. The problem was that accepting what Damien was offering meant accepting that he had involved himself in her life to a degree she had not consented to, using resources she had not asked him to deploy, through a father whose name appeared in enough news articles about organized crime that her own father, careful, guilty, perpetually managing his own image in the aftermath of catastrophe, would have flinched at the connection. The problem was also that she was grateful, which she hated. She sat through AP Calculus and AP Chemistry and a lunch. She barely ate, and a P history with these things turning in her mind. And by the time she was on the subway home, she had arrived at a position. She was going to confront him properly, with full information, and she needed to know exactly what he knew before she could do that. She almost didn't look at the composition notebook that evening. She sat at her desk with her homework open in front of her, and the notebook on the left side of the desk, where it always lived, and she looked at it for a long time, and something about the way it sat, the angle of it, slightly off from where she usually placed it, made her reach over and open it. The page was correct. The entry from the previous night was there. Everything was as she'd left it. She turned back 2 pages. Read. Turned back 2 more. The entries were hers, her handwriting, her particular shorthand, the way she abbreviated certain phrases she used often, the specific marks she made in the margins when she was uncertain about something, the small circles she drew at the end of paragraphs when she'd finished a thought. She turned to the entry from 4 days ago, the entry from the night of the cafeteria incident, the entry she had written in a specific state, post-adrenaline, exhausted, the particular emotional transparency that came after a bad episode when her defenses hadn't fully reassembled yet. The notebook had fallen out of her bag. She remembered that now. She had not been thinking clearly in the corridor after he'd brought her things out, and she had not inventoried her bag, and the notebook had been on the floor. He had picked it up. She turned to the page. Read what she had written. Then she sat very still for a moment. She knew her own handwriting. She knew exactly where her eyes had been on the page when she'd written each line. She could reconstruct the mental state that had produced each sentence. She read it now with the specific knowledge of what it would look like to someone who did not know her, someone who had no context, someone who had picked up a composition notebook from a classroom floor and read it before their conscience had caught up with their hands. She knew which 6 lines he would have read, the angle of the open page where the text began. She could calculate it exactly. She closed the notebook. She put both hands flat on her desk and looked at the wall in front of her and breathed. And it was not a panic attack. It was not the crash and the rain and her mother's face. It was just plain fury, which was a different thing entirely, and in some ways worse because it had nowhere physiological to go. She sat with it for 45 minutes. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went back to Blackwood. Visiting hours ended at 7. It was 6:48. The East Wing was still accessible through the side entrance that students used for after-hours library access, and she used it now, and she walked the corridors with a purpose that made the 2 remaining security personnel she passed look at her and decide not to ask. She knew where he'd be. He ran the same schedule every Tuesday evening. She had not meant to know this, but attention was a thing that happened to her without much active participation. He used the East Wing study room from 6 to 8 on Tuesdays. His family's driver waited in the south lot. She knocked twice on the study room door and opened it without waiting. He looked up from a legal pad covered in handwriting. He was alone. He looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted. A very small recalibration, the adjustment of someone who has just correctly identified the weather system that is about to arrive. She closed the door behind her. "You read it," she said. He held her gaze, did not pretend, did not qualify. "Yes," he said. She had known he would say yes. She had prepared for yes. The preparation turned out to be completely insufficient. "You picked it up off the floor," she said. Her voice was controlled. She had made it controlled deliberately and was spending genuine cognitive resources keeping it that way. "You picked it up, and you read it, and you didn't tell me." "I didn't read all of it." He said this not as a defense, but as a factual correction, which was somehow worse. "It was open. I read 6 lines before I closed it." "Which 6 lines?" A pause. He knew which 6 lines. She could see that he knew. "The ones about the accident," he said. She looked at him. 14 years of keeping that information inside a composition notebook that no one had ever read. 14 years of the specific suffocation of being the only person who knew the things she knew about the night her mother died. She had told no therapist, not the 9-year-old sessions, not the brief and failed attempt at 16. She had told no friend, no teacher, not her father, Not the stepmother who had replaced her mother with what Charlotte had spent years trying to decide was either indecent haste or simply the practical management of grief. She had told no one, and she had not planned to tell anyone, ever, because telling someone meant making it real in a different way, making it a fact that existed outside herself rather than just inside. And she was not sure she could survive it becoming that. And Damien Moretti had read it off the floor of a classroom by accident and said nothing for 4 days. "You've known for 4 days," she said. "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" "No." "Why not?" He set the pen down on the legal pad, looked at her directly. "Because it wasn't my information to introduce. You would have gotten there yourself or you wouldn't have, and either way, it needed to be your choice." She stared at him. "That is the most convenient possible framing of the fact that you violated the only private thing I have." "I know. Stop saying that." "What?" I know, like it's some absolution. You know doesn't do anything. You knowing doesn't." She stopped. Her jaw was tight. She pressed her teeth together and breathed through her nose for a moment because she could feel the architecture of her composure starting to develop stress fractures, and she was not going to cry in this room, in front of him. Again, she was not going to do that. "Say what you need to say," he said, quietly, not moving. "You had no right to read that." "No, I didn't." "You had no right to go to your father. You had no right to call that therapist. You had no right to insert yourself into any of this. I didn't ask you. I have never asked you for anything. I don't know what you think is happening here, but I am not a project and I am not something that needs to be fixed by the Moretti family." "Charlotte." He said her name the same way he'd said it on the bathroom floor. Not soft, just level. "Don't say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like you're trying to calm me down." "I don't need to be calmed down. I am not having an episode. I am angry, and those are different things, and you of all people should know the difference." Something in his face changed. The stillness shifted into something that was not quite the same kind of stillness. "You're right," he said. "They are different, and you're right to be angry." She looked at him. "I read your journal without your permission," he said. "I arranged something without telling you. I should have told you about both things immediately. I didn't, and I don't have a justification for that makes it okay. I have reasons, but reasons aren't the same as it being okay." She stood by the door and looked at him sitting at the study table, and the room was quiet except for the ambient hum of the building and a distant sound of rain beginning outside, and she thought, he is not defending himself. He could. He was Damien Moretti. He could construct any version of a defense he wanted and make it plausible. He was not doing that. He was sitting with the actual weight of the thing and letting her put it on him and not trying to redistribute it. "You know what was in those 6 lines?" she said. "Yes." "And?" "And nothing." He held her gaze without flinching. "It doesn't change what I think about you, if that's what you're asking." "I'm not asking that." "Okay. I'm asking what you're going to do with it." He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing. It's not mine to do anything with." She looked at the rain starting on the study room window. Small drops, building. She thought about her mother's windshield. She did it deliberately, the way you press a bruise to check if it still hurts, and it still hurt the same as always. And she breathed through it, 4 count, hold, and was grateful in a distant way that the architecture of the breathing pattern was automatic now. "It wasn't her fault," Charlotte said. "To the window." He waited. "What I told her, she already knew. About my father and Victoria. She already knew before I found the phone." Her voice was completely flat. She had removed every inflection from it deliberately, the way you drain water from a container before moving it. "I found out later. From something my aunt said 2 years after. My mother already knew. She was deciding what to do about it. And I told her in the car like it was news, like I was—" She stopped, started again. She made that sound. And then the rain, and then the lights. But she already knew. It wasn't because of what I said. She turned from the window and looked at him. "I know that," she said. "Logically. I have known that logically for 7 years, but knowing something logically and knowing it the other way are different things." "Yes," he said, "they are. I wrote it in the journal because that's where I put the things I know logically but can't get to the other way." She paused. "I didn't write it for you to read." "I know, I'm sorry." She stood for a moment. Then she crossed to the chair across the table from him and sat down. He did not react to this with any visible surprise. He picked the pen back up, capped it, set it down again. "The therapist," she said. "Yes." 14 months on the waiting list. "Not for you." She looked at him. "My father made a call," he said. "She has an opening Thursday at 4. It's covered. You don't need to think about the money." "I have to think about the money." "That's not how money works." "It is how it works when someone else has already handled it." She pressed her lips together. "I'm not in debt to your family." "It's not debt." He met her eyes. "Consider it, I don't know, an apology for the journal, an apology for not stopping what was happening to you earlier in the year. Both." A brief pause. "I walked past you in the corridor in September, when Madison's group had you at your locker." Charlotte said nothing. "I kept walking," he said. "I shouldn't have. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm just stating it as a fact." She looked at him for a long moment. The rain on the window was heavier now. She could hear it against the glass. "Thursday at 4, she said. "Thursday at 4. I'll text you the address." "I'll get there myself." "I know. And you're not going to tell anyone what you read." "No." "And you're not going to treat me differently at school." He looked at her with something that was not quite amusement and not quite not. "Define differently." "You know what I mean. No visible whatever this is. At school, we are what we were before." He held her gaze. "What were we before?" "Nothing," she said. "We were nothing." He nodded slowly, and she could not entirely read what was behind that nod, whether it was agreement or acceptance or something that was neither, and she did not ask, because she was running low on the resources required to manage additional complications. She stood up, picked up her bag. "Charlotte." He used her name again, and this time she did not tell him not to, because the particular quality of it was different now. Less clinical anchor, more just her name in his mouth, a thing she did not have a clean category for. "What?" she said. "You've been carrying that alone for 9 years. You don't have to agree with me about the rest of it, but—" He paused. The pause was not a rhetorical tool. It was genuine uncertainty about words, which was the first time she had seen him uncertain about anything. "You didn't cause it. I know you know that. I know knowing it and feeling it are different, but someone should say it to you with their actual voice, out loud, so you've heard it that way. So you've heard it from a person." She stood at the door with her hand on the frame and looked at him across the room. She did not cry. She was careful about that. She held the thing he'd said inside her chest where it landed with a weight she had not been prepared for, and she breathed, 4 count, and she said, "Okay," because she could not think of anything else, and then she left. She went home in the rain. She sat on the subway with her bag in her lap and her reflection faint in the dark window opposite, and she thought about Thursday at 4, and she thought about the composition notebook, and she thought about someone saying it to you with their actual voice, out loud, and the specific mechanism by which that was different from knowing it in silence. She thought about this for the length of 8 subway stops. She also thought about the fact that the thing she had said to him, "We were nothing," had not felt as completely true as it should have, which was information she stored carefully in a compartment she intended to examine later when she had more resources available. She almost went to therapy Thursday. She almost put on her coat, put her bag on her shoulder, looked at the address Damien had texted her, put the address in her Maps application. Then her stepmother Victoria came into the kitchen. Victoria Whitmore was 41 and maintained herself with the specific attention of someone who understood that her position in the household was not fully secure, regardless of the legal documentation that suggested otherwise. She was not cruel in the way Madison Caldwell was cruel. She was not creative about it. She was cruel in the ordinary domestic way of someone who had gotten what she wanted and lived in constant low-level guilt about it, and translated that guilt into intermittent meanness toward the person who was the most visible evidence of the original transgression. "Where are you going?" Victoria said. She was looking at the coat, the bag. The question carried the texture of someone who had already decided the answer was probably unacceptable. "Out," Charlotte said. "Your father expects you at dinner. I'll be back by 7. He gets home at 6:30. He wants everyone present." Charlotte looked at her stepmother. She thought, everyone. as though Charlotte and Victoria were a family unit that assembled around a dinner table with any regularity, rather than two people who shared a house and managed the shared house nature of it with minimum friction because the alternative was worse. "I have an appointment," Charlotte said. "What kind of appointment?" "A doctor's appointment." Victoria's eyes moved to Charlotte's face with a specific quality of attention, not concern, something more like calculation. "What kind of doctor?" "A specialist." "Charlotte." Victoria put her coffee cup on the counter with slightly more force than required. "I am asking you a direct question, and I would appreciate a direct answer." Charlotte looked at her for a moment. The coat was on. The bag was on her shoulder. The address was in her phone. She thought about Thursday at 4, about the 14-month waiting list that was not 14 months for her, about Damien Moretti sitting in a study room in the rain saying someone should say it to you with their actual voice. "A therapist," she said. "A trauma specialist." Victoria was quiet. "I've been having panic attacks since I was 9, Charlotte said. "You know that. You've known that since you moved in. You never asked." Victoria's jaw tightened. "I didn't think it was my place." "I know what you thought," Charlotte said. Not angry, just tired. The particular exhaustion of saying the true thing in a room that has been organized around the untrue thing for years. "I'll be back by 7. Tell Dad I said hi." She walked out. She was on the subway before she registered that she was shaking slightly. Not a panic attack. Nothing that required intervention. Just the physical aftermath of having said a true thing in a room that couldn't handle it. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed and watched the stations go past, and by the time she got off at the right stop, the shaking was mostly gone. The office was in a building in Midtown that had a lobby made of gray stone and a security desk and elevator banks that were polished and quiet. The receptionist at Dr. Aldrin's office was a woman in her 50s who smiled at Charlotte with no particular inflection, neither the special brightness people produced for the visibly fragile, nor the clinical remove of someone who had decided to stop engaging emotionally with the job. Just a regular human smile. "Charlotte Whitmore?" she said. "Yes." "Dr. Aldrin's ready when you are." Charlotte sat down in the waiting room and lasted 3 minutes before she had to get up and stand by the window, which looked out over Midtown in the early evening, the city doing what the city did, entirely indifferent to the fact that a 17-year-old girl was standing in a therapist's waiting room trying to decide if she was going to walk back out. She thought about the notebook. She thought about 9 years of entries that had lived inside her, and the one time she had said the thing out loud, and what it had felt like when he said, "Someone should say it to you with their actual voice." She thought about the fact that she was still alive, which 9 years ago she had not been entirely sure was a permanent condition. She stayed. She went in. Dr. Margaret Aldrin was 63 and had short gray hair and glasses, and a quality of stillness in her office that was different from Damien's quality of stillness. Warmer, more deliberate, the stillness of someone who had practiced it as a discipline rather than developed it as a defense. She sat across a small table from Charlotte and said nothing for the first 30 seconds, just looked at her with the kind of direct attention that Charlotte had spent 9 years avoiding and found, to her surprise, that she could hold. "So," Dr. Aldrin said, "tell me what brings you here." Charlotte opened her mouth. She had prepared for this. She had a version ready, organized, clinical, the version that provided sufficient information to establish the therapeutic context without requiring her to actually say any of the things underneath. She had prepared it on the subway. It was a good version, economical, sufficient. What came out instead was, "When I was 9 years old, I was in a car accident and my mother died, and I've had panic attacks every week since then, and I've never told anyone why." Dr. Aldrin looked at her without changing expression. "Okay," she said, and somehow that okay, steady, present, not performing anything, was the thing that opened the door, and Charlotte began to talk, and she talked for 53 minutes, and she said things she had never said, in that order, with her actual voice. When she came out of the building, it was fully dark and colder than it had been when she went in, the kind of sharp November cold that arrived suddenly and without apology. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed and watched her breath cloud in the air. Her phone had 3 texts. Her father. "Coming home for dinner?" Victoria. "Your father's waiting." And Damien. "How did it go?" She stood on the Midtown sidewalk and looked at that last text for a long time. 3 words. Not performative, not asking her to report back, not managing her, just, how did it go? She typed, I stayed the whole hour. She put her phone in her pocket and started walking toward the subway, and she had gone half a block when her phone buzzed. His response was 2 words, good. Good. She stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk with people moving around her in both directions, the city entirely undisturbed by the specific thing happening inside her chest, which was not a panic attack and was not grief and was not the crash. It was something she did not yet have accurate language for, something that had the quality of relief and also the quality of weight, as though something she had been braced against had shifted, and the bracing was no longer the right posture, but her body didn't know yet what the right posture was instead. She walked to the subway. She went home. Her father was at the kitchen table when she came in, still in his work clothes, a glass of water in front of him. He looked up when she entered. He looked like her, she sometimes thought. The same jaw, the same eyes, the same tendency to hold tension in the shoulders. He also looked like a person who had made a terrible choice 20 years ago and spent the subsequent 2 decades constructing the architectural supports necessary to keep that choice from being the only visible fact about him. Hey, he said. Hey. Where were you? She put her bag on the chair and looked at him. She thought about what she had said to Dr. Aldrin for 53 minutes. She thought about the 9 years of composition notebooks. She thought about Damien in the study room saying, someone should say it to you out loud. I went to a therapist, she said. Her father was quiet. A trauma specialist, she said, for the panic attacks. He set the water glass down. He looked at his hands on the table. You've been having them for a long time, he said. Not a question. A piece of knowledge he had been carrying, she understood. Had always known he'd been carrying, and had not known how to introduce. 9 years, she said, since the accident. Her father said nothing for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs she could hear Victoria moving around. I should have, he started. Yes, Charlotte said. Not cruel, not an ambush, just true. You should have. He looked at her. He was 51 years old, and he looked in that moment older and younger than that simultaneously, the older part being what the years had put on him, and the younger part being the expression on his face right now, which was the expression of a person encountering the direct weight of a thing they had been managing carefully from the side for a very long time. I'm going every Thursday, she said. I just wanted you to know. She picked up her bag and went upstairs. She sat at her desk for an hour. She did not open the composition notebook. She thought about what Dr. Aldrin had said near the end of the session, in a tone that was so matter-of-fact it took a moment to land. You've built a very sophisticated survival architecture. That's impressive, and it has cost you a great deal. We're going to spend some time figuring out what you actually want to build instead. Charlotte had sat with that. Then she had said, how long does that take? And Dr. Aldrin had said, as long as it takes, usually longer than people want and shorter than they fear. She sat at her desk and thought about that answer, which was more honest than most of the answers she had received from adults in her life about things that mattered. She picked up her phone. She typed to Damien. She said it takes as long as it takes. She put the phone down. His response came back in 90 seconds. That sounds right. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She fell asleep before midnight and did not wake from the crash until 4 a.m., which was an hour later than usual. And when the panic came, she breathed through it, 4 counts, hold, release, and it took 11 minutes, and then she was back. 11 minutes. Faster than it had been in years. She lay in the dark afterward and thought, maybe, just maybe. She thought about the composition notebook, and the 6 lines in the study room, and the rain on the window, and her mother's hand on the wheel. And she thought about Dr. Aldrin's office in 53 minutes, and the specific texture of saying a true thing out loud to someone who did not flinch. She thought about Thursday becoming part of her week. She thought about the fact that something had shifted, somewhere in the last 72 hours. And she didn't fully understand the geometry of the shift yet, but she could feel that things were not arranged the same way they had been, and the rearrangement included, in some capacity she was not yet ready to examine directly, a 17-year-old boy with his father's jaw and his own particular quality of stillness, who had read 6 lines off a classroom floor and carried them quietly for 4 days and said nothing and then said everything. She was still thinking about this when she fell back asleep. She did not see, because she was asleep, the text he sent at 4:15 a.m. "You're not alone in it anymore, just so you know." She read it in the morning, on the subway, and held her phone in both hands, and the city moved past the window, and she did not write back right away because she needed a minute with it first. She needed a minute with the fact that those 8 words were the truest thing anyone had said to her in 9 years, and the fact that the person who had said them was someone she had told, not 3 days ago, that they were nothing to each other. She looked at his text for the length of 4 subway stops. Then she put her phone in her pocket and stared at the window and thought, "I have to decide what I'm going to do about him." And beneath that thought, quiet and unavoidable, "I think I've already decided." She read his text 4 more times over the course of that Friday. Not consecutively. She had better discipline than that. But in the way you return to something that keeps requiring re-examination, the way you press the bruise again not because you enjoy the pain, but because you are trying to accurately map its edges. You're not alone in it anymore, just so you know. She did not write back that day. She wrote back Saturday morning, from her desk, with her coffee going cold beside her. "Okay, 1 word." He sent back nothing, which was correct, which was the right response to okay when okay was carrying the weight hers was carrying, and she appreciated that he understood the weight without requiring her to specify it. The following 2 weeks had a different texture than the weeks before them. Not dramatically different. Nothing visible changed at Blackwood. They maintained the architecture she had specified, the distance, the nothing-to-see-here quality of 2 people who occupied the same school without occupying the same space. She sat in her classes. He sat in his. They did not eat lunch together, did not walk to the same classes, did not stand near each other in the corridors in the ways that people at Blackwood would have clocked and cataloged and turned into social information within 48 hours. But Thursday at 4 became a fixed point in her week, and something in the composition of her days organized itself quietly around that fixed point. And the panic attacks did not stop, but they became, not shorter exactly, but more navigable, less total, less the sensation of being pulled entirely under and more the sensation of being pulled under and knowing this time that the surface was still there. Dr. Aldrin did not talk to her about Damien. Charlotte had not mentioned him. She had mentioned a lot of other things. The accident, her father, the particular cruelty of Madison's campaign, the mechanics of panic in a public setting, the specific shame of losing control of your own body in a room full of people who are watching. She had not mentioned the boy who had been present at most of the worst moments of the last 3 weeks, and had not, in any of those moments, made them worse. She was aware that this omission was its own kind of information. At school, the quiet redistribution of the social architecture that had governed Charlotte's life at Blackwood for 2 years continued without announcement. Madison Caldwell had not returned. Her friends, Priya, Jenna, a rotating auxiliary cast of girls who had understood their social position as dependent on proximity to Madison, recalibrated without their center of gravity and became simply people who no longer looked at Charlotte at all, which was not friendship, but was significantly better than what had preceded it. Nobody talked about why. Everyone understood why. Damien ate lunch at his usual table with the 2 or 3 people he tolerated, said what he needed to say in class, ran his after-hours schedule with its study sessions and his father's calls and the particular administrative work of being a Moretti heir that had no formal name but occupied genuine hours of his week. He watched Charlotte in the peripheral way that he watched most things. Not staring, not the obvious surveillance of someone performing attention, just the ambient tracking of someone who had decided that another person's safety was a variable he was unwilling to stop monitoring. He left a mango juice on her desk one morning. Just set it there when the classroom was empty before anyone arrived. He was not present when she got there. There was no note. She drank it and said nothing, and the following morning there was another one, and she understood that this was its own language, a language without nouns, and she did not object to it. She told Dr. Aldrin, on the 3rd Thursday, that there was someone at school who had helped her through several episodes. She described him without his name, a classmate, she said, someone who had some experience with this kind of thing in his family, someone who did not panic in the presence of her panic. Dr. Aldrin had asked, "What does his presence feel like when the episodes happen?" Charlotte had thought about this. "Like a fixed point," she said. "Like there's something that isn't moving." Dr. Aldrin had written something on her notepad and not said anything, and Charlotte had looked at the window and understood that this was the kind of thing that would require more sessions to properly examine, and she was not ready to properly examine it yet, and Dr. Aldrin was not going to rush her, and this arrangement suited both of them. 3 weeks after the cafeteria, on a Wednesday that had started as an ordinary Wednesday, gray sky, cold, a P, history first period, Charlotte arrived at school 17 minutes before the first bell and found something on her desk. Not a mango juice. A folded piece of paper. White. No markings on the outside. She opened it. Inside, in handwriting that was not Damien's and was not anyone she recognized, printed block letters, anonymous in the way that deliberate anonymity always announces itself, were 2 sentences. He read your journal. Ask him what else he's done with what he found. She read it twice, put it in her bag, sat down. Her hands were steady. She noted this with some distance, the way she had learned in 3 weeks of Thursday sessions to observe her own physiological responses as data rather than commands. Hands steady, breathing even, heart rate elevated but not alarmingly so. She was not panicking, she was thinking. She sat through AP History and AP Chemistry and thought very precisely and methodically about who had written those 2 sentences and what they meant by what else he's done with what he found, and whether the note was true or a construction, and whether those 2 things were even fully distinct from each other. She found him at lunch. She did not sit down across from him at his table. She stood at the end of it and said, "I need to talk to you." He looked up, read her face in the way he read most things, quickly. Completely. Whatever he read there made him set his fork down. "Okay," he said. They went to the east corridor. She handed him the note. He read it. His expression did not change, which she watched carefully because the absence of change was its own information. "When did you get this?" he said. "This morning, my desk." He folded it, handed it back. "Someone left it for you, obviously." She looked at him. "So what does it mean?" He was quiet for a second, not the quiet of someone formulating a lie, she thought, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the true thing to release and in what order. She had developed over the last 3 weeks a reasonable calibration for the difference. "I told my father about you," he said, "when I asked him for Dr. Aldrin's name." "How much did you tell him?" "That someone needed a trauma specialist, that I wanted to arrange access without the normal channels. That discretion was essential." "Did you tell him what was in the journal?" "No." Immediate. No construction around it. "Did you tell him anything else about me?" He held her gaze. "I told him your name. He would have needed it to arrange the appointment." Charlotte stood in the corridor and breathed. "So Vincent Moretti knows my name." "Yes. Vincent Moretti knows I have a trauma history." "In general terms, Vincent Moretti," she said, "who runs—" She stopped. She was aware, in the way that anyone in New York with functioning ears and access to news was aware, of what Vincent Moretti ran. She had not, until this moment, had personal cause to think about the specific implications of that awareness. She looked at Damien. "Does your father know I exist?" she said, "in a specific way. Does he know what I am to you?" Something in his face shifted. The smallest thing. "What are you to me?" he said. "Don't do that." Her voice was flat. "Don't answer a question with a question when the question I asked is whether your father has done anything with my name." He was quiet. "Damien." "He asked me about you," he said, after I called him. "He's observant. He asked me if this was someone I cared about, and I said yes." The corridor was empty around them. The lunch period sounds came from the direction of the cafeteria. Distant, ordinary, the sounds of a school that was not paying attention to this specific hallway. "And then what?" Charlotte said. "And then he said he'd look into you to make sure you were—" He paused. The pause was the first time she had seen him struggle with a word. He said he wanted to know who his son was involved with. Charlotte stood with that for a moment. "Your father ran a background investigation on me," she said. "Probably. Without my knowledge." "Yes." "And you knew he was going to do that?" "I knew it was possible. I didn't know for certain." She looked at him. Something cold was moving through her. Not panic, not the crash, Not the thing that required 4 counts and a fixed point. Something cleaner, and in some ways more dangerous. Clarity. What did he find? She said. Charlotte, what did he find, Damien? If someone left that note on my desk this morning, then someone knows something that they think I should be scared of, and that someone either has access to whatever your father found or is your father. So I am asking you directly, what did Vincent Moretti find when he looked into me? He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, your father's financial situation is worse than you know. She waited. The brownstone has a second mortgage, taken out 18 months ago. The investment portfolio he had. Damien stopped, started again. Victoria's lifestyle has a cost. He's been managing it with debt that's been accumulating quietly. There are 3 creditors who are not, he chose the word deliberately, institutional. Charlotte stood very still. What does that mean? She said. Not institutional. It means they're not banks. She looked at him. She understood what she was hearing. She was 17 years old and she had grown up in New York, and she understood, from news articles and ambient cultural knowledge, and the particular quality of what she was looking at right now. Damien Moretti's face, which was telling her the truth in the way that faces tell the truth when they've decided to stop managing it, exactly what not institutional meant. Your father's organization, she said. Not directly, indirectly through 2 layers of intermediary. My father owes money to people connected to your father's organization. Yes. She turned away from him, faced the wall, put one hand flat against it. The wall was cool. She pressed her palm harder into it, breathed. This was not a panic attack. She was not going back to the crash. She was standing in a corridor at Blackwood Preparatory Academy at 12:30 in the afternoon, and she had just been told that her father's financial precarity had created an intersection between her family and the Moretti organization that predated Damien finding her on a bathroom floor by an indeterminate amount of time, and she was processing this information as data because the alternative, allowing it to become something her body could act on, was not available to her right now. She turned back around. Does your father know that you know me? She said. As in, does he understand that the girl whose name he ran and the girl whose father owes money to his people are the same person? Yes, Damien said. When did he understand that? The same night I called him. He made the connection quickly. He's good at that. Charlotte looked at him. She thought about the note on her desk. Ask him what else he's done with what he found. She thought about the 14-month waiting list that had opened for her specifically. She thought about the precise sequence of events. The journal, the call to his father, the name of the therapist, the appointment, the mango juice on her desk every morning. And she re-examined that sequence now with this new piece of information installed in it. Did your father tell you to help me? She said. No. Are you sure? I'm sure. Because from where I'm standing, she stopped. Her voice was doing something at the edges that she did not like. She made it level again, deliberately. From where I'm standing, there's a version of this where your father found out that the girl you'd started involving yourself with was the daughter of a man who owed him money and decided that was a useful relationship to maintain. And you have either not considered that possibility or you've considered it and decided not to tell me. He said nothing. Which one? She said. I considered it, he said. I decided it didn't change what I was doing. It doesn't change what you were doing, she repeated. Damien, my father might be financially leveraged to your family's organization. You knew that. You continued to insert yourself into my life. Do you understand how that looks? I understand how it looks. Do you understand what it means that I can't? She stopped again, pressed her teeth together. I can't just trust that what you've done has been what you said it was. I have no way to verify that now. You've made it so I can't verify it. I know, he said. Stop saying that. Charlotte, no. She took a step back. No, you do not get to say my name like that right now. You have spent 3 weeks building something that I was starting to... She stopped. The thing at the edges of her voice was getting worse. She managed it. I was starting to rely on. And I don't rely on people. That's not something I do. And I had started to, and now I'm standing here finding out that the entire foundation of it might have been that your father might have... My father didn't tell me to help you, Damien said. His voice had changed. Not louder, just more present. more direct. I made that call to him because you needed something and I had a way to get it. Not because he was going to benefit from it. Not because of your father's debt. Because you were on a bathroom floor not breathing, and then you were in a classroom screaming, and then you were sitting across from me in a study room telling me you'd been carrying something alone for 9 years, and I... He stopped. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the stillness, not the calculation. Something underneath both of those things. Something that had been underneath them the whole time and was now, in this corridor with the note in her hand and the clarity moving through her like cold water, no longer adequately covered by either. I couldn't not, he said. The 3 words came out simply, without architecture around them. She stood and looked at him and felt the thing in her chest that she had been not examining for 3 weeks exert itself quietly and insistently. That is not a sufficient answer, she said. I know. I don't have a sufficient answer. Then what do I do with this? He said nothing. Which was honest, she thought. Honest in the way that mattered. Not comfortable, not managing, just the plain acknowledgement that he did not know what she did with it either. She looked at the note in her hand. Who wrote this? She said. I don't know. I'll find out. Don't. She folded it and put it back in her bag. Don't find out. Don't handle it. Don't make a call. She met his eyes. This is exactly the problem, Damien. Every time something happens, you make a call. You have a resource, you deploy it. And I end up standing somewhere I didn't know I was walking into, surrounded by the consequences of calls I didn't make. He took that. Did not flinch. Did not defend. Your father, he said. The debt. That's my problem. It might not stay your problem. Then it becomes my problem in a different form, she said. It's still mine. She looked at him. Is my father in danger? Not currently. What does currently mean? It means the debt is being managed. It means no one is moving on it. Because of you. A pause. Because my father has chosen not to move on it. Because of you, she said again. He held her gaze and did not deny it. She stood in the corridor and breathed and thought about her father at the kitchen table with his water glass. The expression on his face when she'd said, I've been having panic attacks since I was 9. The way he'd looked older and younger simultaneously. She thought about the brownstone with its second mortgage. She thought about Victoria's lifestyle and the creditors who were not institutional. She thought about Thursday at 4 and Dr. Aldrin saying as long as it takes. She thought about 8 words at 4:15 in the morning. You're not alone in it anymore. She thought about the specific, precise, terrible difficulty of trusting anything when the ground you were standing on kept turning out to have been differently shaped than it appeared. I need to think, she said. Okay. I need you to not leave anything on my desk for a while. Something in his face moved. Okay, he said again. I need the space to figure out what any of this actually is without, she gestured, imprecisely, at the space between them. Without the accumulation of small things making it harder to see clearly. I understand, he said. She picked up her bag, started walking. Charlotte, his voice behind her from the corridor. She did not stop walking. I know who sent the note, he said. She stopped. She turned around slowly. He was standing where she'd left him, and his expression had settled back into something more controlled, but not all the way. There was a residue of the thing she had seen underneath the stillness, and it was still visible, and she thought that maybe it was always visible if you knew where to look, and she had apparently learned where to look without meaning to. Who? She said. My father's associate. Someone who has been watching you since my father ran your information. Someone who thought... He paused. His jaw was tight. Someone who thought telling you would be a useful move. Useful for who? For separating us. She stood in the corridor and looked at him from 8 feet away. Why would separating us be useful for anyone? She said. He looked at her directly. Because I'm the Moretti heir, and my father needs me to be thinking about things that are not a scholarship student, with a complicated home situation and a trauma history that has the potential to become publicly visible. The sentence landed with the specific weight of something that had been said for the first time but had been true for longer than the conversation. She processed it. All of it. The layers of it. The social calculation. The organizational calculation. The fact that someone in Vincent Moretti's circle had looked at her and seen a liability, a distraction, a variable requiring management. She thought about being 9 years old and finding messages on her father's phone and deciding to say the thing. She had not decided to say it. She had simply said it because she had been 9 and did not yet know that some true things required strategic management before deployment. She was 17 now. "I'll talk to you later," she said. "When?" "When I know what I want to say." She met his eyes one more time, one long, level, complicated look that she did not try to make simpler than it was. "Don't let your father do anything about my father's debt. Not while I'm figuring this out. I'll tell him. Tell him it's not a request." Something that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost. "He won't like that framing." "I don't care what he likes," she said. "Tell him anyway." She walked away. She was on the subway home before the shaking started, and it was not a panic attack. It was just her body finally processing the last 2 hours, and she let it come, held her hands in her lap, breathed, 4 counts, hold, and watched the stations go past and thought about all of it. The note, the debt, the associate who had decided she was a liability, the expression on Damien's face when he said "I couldn't not," the specific quality of those 3 words, which were not a declaration and were not a strategy and were not a managed communication. They were just the truth of a thing, unarchitected, delivered because the architecture had finally run out of room. She got off at her stop and walked the 4 blocks to the brownstone and went inside and stood in the hallway with her coat on for a moment, looking at the house. The wood floors her father had refinished 3 years ago, the framed print on the wall that her mother had chosen, the stairs going up to the room where she kept 14 composition notebooks in a box under her bed. Her father came out of the kitchen. "You okay?" he said. She looked at him. She looked at the face that was like hers, at the shoulders that carried the particular posture of a man who had been managing something heavy for a long time. "Dad," she said, "I need to talk to you about something." He looked at her, read her face the way parents sometimes read their children's faces, with the specific panic of someone who has been expecting a particular conversation and has never been ready for it. "Okay," he said. He pulled out a kitchen chair. "Sit down." She sat down. She thought about where to start, and then she thought, start with the true thing, the way she had started in Dr. Aldrin's office, the way Dr. Aldrin had taught her. Not the organized version, not the managed version, just the true thing in the order it arrived. She opened her mouth, and before she could say a word, her father's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Something drained out of it. Not gradually, but all at once, the way color leaves a face when the body redirects blood for more urgent purposes. He looked at her. "I have to take this," he said. She watched him walk into the other room. She heard him answer, his voice low, controlled, the specific vocal register of a man who is being careful about what sounds he makes in proximity to someone he is trying to protect. She sat at the kitchen table. She heard one sentence, through the wall, in the voice her father used only when he was genuinely afraid. "I understand. I'll have it by Friday." She sat very still. Friday was 2 days away, and she understood. Sitting at the kitchen table with her coat still on, and the composition notebook in her bag, and Thursday, still 3 days away, and the conversation with Damien still rearranging itself in the back of her mind, she understood that whatever she had been figuring out was going to have to be figured out faster than she'd thought, because the ground had shifted again, and this time it had not merely shifted, but had announced plainly and without apology that it intended to keep moving. She pulled out her phone. She typed to Damien, "I need you to call your father." The response came in 40 seconds. "Already did." She stared at that. Then, "He called mine first." She put the phone face down on the kitchen table and listened to her father's voice through the wall, low, careful, afraid. And she thought, there is no version of this where I stay on the outside of it. There is no version where I let someone else manage the ground I'm standing on and trust that the management is benevolent. There is no version anymore where I keep the journal closed and the distance maintained and the nothing to see here architecture intact. She picked the phone back up. She typed, "I need to meet your father. 30 seconds. Are you sure?" She looked at her father's empty chair across the table. "Yes," she typed. "When?" She thought about Friday. 2 days. "Tomorrow," she wrote. The response took longer this time, 90 seconds. She watched the screen. Then, "I'll arrange it." "Charlotte, you don't have to do this." She looked at the wall through which she could still faintly hear her father's voice. She typed back the last thing she had expected to type, the thing that was nevertheless completely and exactly true. "Yes, I do. And I think you know that." The response when it came was not a word. It was, "I know." She put the phone in her pocket, took her coat off, folded it over the back of the chair, and waited for her father to come back into the room so she could begin. Her father came back into the kitchen with his phone in his hand and his face rearranged into the version he used when he was trying to appear composed in front of her, which she had been able to see through since she was 12 years old. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Sit down, Dad," she said. He sat. She had thought, on the subway, that she would need to find a way into the conversation, an angle, a starting point, something that didn't require her to say the most difficult thing first. She had spent years developing the skill of managing the approach to difficult things, the same way you approach a dog you're not sure about, slowly, from the side, giving it time to recognize you before you got close. She was done with that approach. "How much do you owe?" she said. His face did something complicated. His hands, which had been flat on the table, moved, one reaching for the water glass that was not there anymore, finding nothing, settling back. "Charlotte, how much?" He looked at the table, then at her. 84,000. She breathed in, breathed out. "To who?" "A man named Carver. He operates through a—" Her father stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "He's not a bank." "I know he's not a bank." She held his gaze. "Is he connected to the Moretti organization?" The silence that followed that question had a specific texture, heavy. The silence of someone encountering a piece of information in a place they did not expect to find it. "How do you know that name?" her father said. "Answer the question." "Charlotte, how do you know—" "Dad." Her voice came out steady, and she was proud of that, the steadiness of it, because underneath the steadiness was a significant amount of material that was not steady at all. "I know Damian Moretti. At school. She paused. "He helped me. More than once. His father found out about me and ran information on our family, and that is how I know what I know. And I need you to tell me the rest of it right now." Her father sat across the table from her and looked, in that moment, like a man who had been trying to hold a wall up alone for a long time and had just been informed that the wall had already fallen, had been down for longer than he knew, and all the effort had been holding up nothing. "He's 2 degrees removed from the Moretti organization," her father said. "The loan went through a real estate intermediary. I didn't know, at first. I found out 6 months in when I missed a payment, and the nature of the follow-up communication made the connection clear. And you didn't tell me. You're 17. "I've been 17 for 8 months. You've owed this money for 18 months, he said, quietly. Charlotte sat with that number. "Friday?" she said. "He wants it by Friday." Her father's jaw tightened. "He's moving up the timeline. That was supposed to be—" He stopped, started again. "I had an arrangement. The phone call tonight moved the timeline." "Why? I don't know." He looked at her. Something in his face changed. A layer of the parental management falling away, leaving just the face of a person who was frightened and didn't know who to be frightened in front of. "Charlotte, how deep is your involvement with the Moretti boy?" She held his gaze. "Deep enough that his father knows who we are. Deep enough that I texted Damian 20 minutes ago and told him I need to meet his father tomorrow." Her father was very still. "I'm going to fix this," she said. "You are not going to—" "Dad." She leaned forward, put her hands flat on the table between them, the same way she pressed her palms against things when she needed to feel that something was solid. "You have been carrying this alone. You have been carrying it the same way I carried the panic attacks. Alone, quietly, managing it from the inside because telling someone meant making it real. And I understand that. I understand it better than you know. But managing it alone has gotten us to a place where someone is calling on a Wednesday night to move a payment deadline to Friday, which means the situation is no longer stable enough to manage alone." She looked at him. "Let me help." He looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way parents sometimes look at their children when they encounter unexpectedly the person their child has been becoming while they were paying attention to other things. "Okay," he said. His voice was rough. "Okay." She pulled out her phone and texted Damien. "My father owes $84,000 to a man named Carver. 2 degrees from your organization. Carver moved the deadline to this Friday. I need your father to know this before tomorrow." The response came in under a minute. "He already knows. He moved it." She stared at the screen. "Your father is being tested," Damien wrote. "Not by Carver. Carver got a call this afternoon." She typed, "From who?" "The associate who left the note. He's been running his own play. He wants to use your father's debt to push you out before tomorrow's meeting." She put the phone down on the table, looked at her father. "Whoever moved the deadline tonight, it wasn't about your payment. It was about me." Her father stared at her. "Explain." "Someone in the Moretti organization doesn't want me meeting Vincent Moretti tomorrow. They moved the deadline to create a crisis that would prevent it." She stood up. "Which means they're afraid of what happens if I do meet him." Her father's face was doing several things at once. "Charlotte, I'm going," she said. "Tomorrow. I'm going to meet him, and I'm going to say what needs to be said, and then this is going to be over." She went upstairs. She did not open the composition notebook. She sat at her desk and looked at the wall and thought about everything she needed to say to Vincent Moretti, organized it, checked it against every piece of information she had, then checked it again. She did this until 1 in the morning. She slept for 4 hours without dreaming. The Moretti residence was not what she'd expected. She had built a picture in her mind, something ostentatious, all dark wood, and the specific aesthetic of power that announced itself loudly because it was insecure. What she found instead was a brownstone on the Upper East Side that was larger than most and quieter than any, with nothing on its exterior to distinguish it from its neighbors except a quality of stillness around it, as though the street had learned to give it a certain radius of space. Damien met her outside at 2:30 in the afternoon. He had come home from school at lunch. She had left a note in her own classes saying she had a medical appointment, which was not entirely inaccurate. He looked at her when she got out of the cab. She looked back at him. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You texted me that last night." "Still true. Still going in." She stopped in front of him. He was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his stillness, which was different today. Wound tighter, less the stillness of someone at rest, and more the stillness of someone holding something in place by effort. "Who's the associate?" "His name is Greco. He's been with my father for 12 years. He runs the financial side of certain operations." He paused. "He's inside." "He's in there right now. My father called him in this morning when he found out about the note and the deadline. He doesn't know yet that we know it was him." "But your father suspects." "My father doesn't suspect. My father knows. He just hasn't moved on it yet." He held her gaze. "My father moves slowly when he's certain." She thought about that. "Does Greco know I'm coming?" she said. "No, my father told him the 2 o'clock meeting was a financial review." She looked at the brownstone, at the quiet street, at the particular quality of space the building occupied. "What is your father expecting from this meeting?" she said. "I don't know exactly. I told him you wanted to discuss the debt situation and your place in it. I told him you were not—" He paused. "I told him you were not someone he could underestimate." She looked at him. "Did he believe you?" she said. "He will in about 10 minutes, Damien said." They went inside. The interior was exactly the quality she'd expected once she'd abandoned her initial picture. Restrained, careful, every object in it selected rather than accumulated. A hallway, a sitting room, a staircase. A man standing near the window of the main room who she understood immediately was not Vincent Moretti and was therefore Greco. Mid-50s, compact build, the specific posture of someone who spent a significant portion of their professional life in rooms where the wrong posture could be misread fatally. He looked at her when she walked in with Damien, and his face produced an expression that it then immediately and not quite quickly enough tried to remove. Surprise. And beneath the surprise, calculation, and beneath the calculation, something that was the first stage of concern. Vincent Moretti was standing near the fireplace. Not sitting. Standing, in the way that men stand when they have decided in advance that the room is theirs. He was 53. He looked like Damien in the way that templates look like their iterations. The same jaw, the same quality of attention, but deeper set, more weathered, the version of those things that had been tested by more years and harder conditions. He was wearing a suit that was not ostentatious. He was looking at Charlotte with the same quality of total attention that she had come to associate with his son, and he had been looking at her, she understood, since before she walked in, since Damien had first said her name on a phone call 7 weeks ago. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was even. "Sit down." "I'll stand," she said. Something moved in his face. Not offense, more like reassessment, a recalibration of whatever category he had placed her in prior to this moment. He nodded slightly. "All right." Damien stood to her left and slightly behind. Not between her and his father, that would have been a statement he hadn't been asked to make. Just present, available. Greco stood to Vincent's right, and she did not look at him directly yet. "I understand you wanted to discuss your father's financial situation," Vincent Moretti said. "No," Charlotte said. "I wanted to discuss what's being done with it." He waited. "My father owes a debt," she said. "The timeline on that debt was moved last night from an agreed date to this Friday. That move was not made by you." She held his gaze. "It was made by someone in this room who wanted to create a situation that would prevent me from being here today." The room was very quiet. Greco did not move. That was information. Vincent Moretti looked at Charlotte for a long moment. Then he looked at Greco. Greco's face was doing the thing faces do when they are deciding between two responses, and both of them are wrong. "Interesting," Vincent said. Not to Greco, to Charlotte. "How do you know this?" "Because the same person left a note on my desk at school 2 days ago, designed to make me distrust your son and remove myself from his life." She paused. "Which is what you wanted, originally, before you knew me. You told Damien to be careful about involvement with a girl from a compromised family. That was a reasonable position for you to hold. It was also what Greco was exploiting when he made his move. He was using your stated position to cover his own play." Vincent Moretti looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at his son. Damien met his father's gaze and said nothing. He had said what he needed to say before they walked in. This part was hers. "What is Greco's play?" Vincent said. To Charlotte, directly. "I don't know the full shape of it," she said. "But he used a debt connected to your organization to leverage pressure on my father, and he used me as a variable in a situation he was trying to control, which means he wanted a line of influence into my household that ran outside your knowledge. Why he wanted that?" She paused. "That's your question to ask him, not mine." Greco moved, not toward her. A small, involuntary shift of weight, the body's response to a trap closing. Vincent saw it. He looked at Greco for a long moment with the quality of attention that Charlotte had spent 3 seconds on the street outside recognizing as the dominant inheritance of the Moretti line. Patient, complete, and already finished. "Leave," Vincent said. Greco looked at him. "Now," Vincent said. The word was quiet and did not require elaboration. Greco left. The room contracted to 3 people: Charlotte, Damien, Vincent. Charlotte kept her hands at her sides. Her heart was doing something significant in her chest, but her breathing was controlled, and she was standing at her full height, and she did not look away from Vincent Moretti. "My son," Vincent said, "has not spoken about anyone the way he has spoken about you in 17 years. He let that land. Then, "I ran your information because that is what I do with variables in my son's life. I found your father's situation. I did not create it. I want to be clear about that." "I know you didn't create it," she said. "I'm asking you to release it." He studied her. "Release it." "The debt. The connection to your organization through Carver. I'm asking you to settle it and close it, completely. No remaining obligation." She held his gaze. "I know what I'm asking. I'm not asking for free. I'm asking for a price I can actually pay." "What price do you think you can pay?" "I don't know yet. That's what I want to negotiate." Something moved across Vincent Moretti's face that she later spent a long time trying to name. It was not a smile, not exactly. It was the expression of someone encountering a thing they did not expect and finding it, despite themselves, worthy of genuine regard. You came into my house, he said, at 17 years old, to negotiate your father's debt to my organization. Yes? Knowing who I am. Yes. With no leverage and no collateral. I have one thing, she said. Your son considers me worth protecting. You consider your son worth protecting. That's not nothing. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Damien. Damien was looking at Charlotte with an expression that he had not entirely prepared his face for, the expression of someone watching a thing happen that they could not have predicted and could not look away from. Vincent turned back to Charlotte. He was quiet for 15 seconds, which was a long time in that room. Sit down, he said. Both of you. They sat. What followed was 45 minutes that Charlotte later described to Dr. Aldrin in the most compressed and edited version she could produce as a negotiation which was accurate but incomplete. What it actually was a sustained test of a kind she had not encountered before, not hostile, not theatrical, but relentless in the specific way of someone determining, with genuine care and genuine precision, the actual nature of the thing in front of them. He asked about her academic record. She told him. He asked about her plans after Blackwood. She told him. He asked about her father's situation, and she told him the part she knew, and said, I don't know about the part she didn't, and he noted the distinction, and she understood he was noting it. He asked why she had agreed to therapy. She looked at him. Because I needed it, and someone arranged access, and I decided the arrangement, complicated as it was less important than the need. He asked what she thought of his son. She held his gaze for a moment. I think he is genuinely good at a thing that isn't taught in this family. I think it costs him to be good at it, and he does it anyway. Vincent was quiet after that one for a moment longer than the others. Then he said, The debt is closed as of today. No remaining obligation, no price. She stared at him. Consider it a cost of doing business with someone who misused my resources for his own purposes, he said. He meant Greco. The flatness with which he said it told her that Greco's situation was already handled in his mind, handled completely, and she did not ask for details because they were not hers to ask for. I don't accept gifts, she said. It's not a gift. It's a correction. He met her eyes. Miss Whitmore, there are very few people who walk into a room with me carrying nothing and leave with something. You should understand that what you did today is not typical. I know, she said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. The same micro-expression she had seen on Damien a dozen times. Hereditary, apparently. I'm going to tell you something, Vincent said. As a professional courtesy, let's say, because my son is involved, and because you've earned it. He leaned forward slightly. What Greco was running was not about your father's debt. Your father's debt was a tool. What Greco was actually running was a parallel financial operation using 3 accounts connected to my organization that I was not supposed to know existed. He paused. You walked in here today and gave me the thread that let me pull the rest of it. That has value to me that is worth considerably more than your father's $84,000. Charlotte absorbed this. So I wasn't negotiating, she said. You already knew you were going to close the debt. I knew I was going to close it after your first sentence, he said. The rest was interest. She looked at him. She thought about 17 years of this man forming his son, about the particular way Damien had learned to hold a room, to move through it, to pay attention, where those things came from and what they had cost and what had been preserved through the cost. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. Thank my son. He called me 7 weeks ago and said someone needs help. He's never done that before. Not once. A pause. I was curious about you before you walked in. Now I understand why he called. She stood up. Damien stood beside her. They walked to the door. Miss Whitmore, Vincent's voice from behind them. She turned. He was still in his chair, still with that quality of complete occupancy of any space he was in. Take care of what my son can't take care of himself. You understand what I mean. She understood. He meant the soft parts. The parts that the Moretti training had not reached or had deliberately avoided reaching. The parts that were, underneath everything else, still there. I know, she said. They walked out into the afternoon. On the steps outside, the November air hit them both, cold, clean, carrying the smell of the city and the coming winter. She stood with her coat pulled around her and looked at the street, at the ordinary Thursday afternoon motion of the Upper East Side, at the complete indifference of the city to what had just happened in that brownstone. Damien stood beside her, close but not touching. "You didn't tell me he was going to do that," she said. "I didn't know he was going to do that. Really. I told him you weren't someone he could underestimate. I didn't know what he was going to decide about the debt." He paused. "He doesn't tell me his decisions in advance. He makes them, and then they're made." She looked at him. He was looking at the street, his profile steady against the gray afternoon sky. "He said you've never called him to help someone before," she said. "He's right." "Why me?" He turned to look at her. He held her gaze with the same directness he had held it with since the first day in the corridor outside the bathroom, the same quality of not performing anything, and he said, "You know why." She looked back at him. She thought about 4 months of mornings with mango juice on her desk. She thought about the count of 4 on a bathroom floor. She thought about 8 words at 4:15 in the morning. She thought about what his father had just said about the soft parts. She thought about the space she had asked him to give her 3 days ago. The nothing on my desk, the nothing to see here, the distance she had requested and he had honored without complaint. "Is this because you love me?" she said. The question came out simply, without the architecture she might have put around it if she'd planned it, and she hadn't planned it. It came out the way true questions come out when you've stopped managing the approach to them. He stood on the steps of his father's house in the November afternoon and looked at her, and the stillness was different again. Not controlled, not defensive, not the carefully maintained quality of someone who has learned to present an unreadable surface to rooms that are always being read. Just present, just him. "Yes," he said, not loud. The single word carrying the weight of someone who had known the answer for a long time and had been patient about it in the particular way that people are patient about things they cannot rush. She stood on the step below him, which made them almost exactly the same height, and looked at him. She thought about what she wanted to say, about all the ways she could manage this moment, contain it, put the appropriate distance around it until she was sure, until she had processed it through enough Thursday sessions to arrive at it cleanly. She thought about 9 years of managing things from the inside. "I'm not ready," she said. Honest, completely honest. "I know," he said. "I need time." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "But I need you to know that the reason I'm not ready isn't—" She stopped. Started again. "It's not because I don't know what the answer is. It's because I want to be able to give it properly, without all of this in the way." She gestured vaguely at the general direction of the last 4 months. The bathroom floor, the journal, the cafeteria, the note, the brownstone, the 45 minutes with his father. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face settled. Not disappointment, not patience as performance, but something that was genuinely and simply fine with the things she had said. "I'll wait," he said. "For how long?" "As long as you need." No hesitation, no qualification. She looked at him and felt the particular specific weight of that, the weight of someone meaning a thing, plainly, without conditions attached. "Okay," she said. She started down the steps. "Charlotte." He said her name and she turned, 1 step below him, looking up. "What your father said on the phone last night." He paused. "The debt. It's cleared. His account with Carver will show a 0 balance by morning. He doesn't need to know how." She looked at him. "He'll figure it out eventually," she said. "Probably. By then it won't matter." She stood on the step and looked up at him, and thought about her father at the kitchen table and the water glass and 18 months of carrying something alone. And she thought about how she had sat across from him last night and started to say the true thing, and his phone had rung before she got there. "I'm going to tell him everything," she said. "Tonight. About the therapy and the attacks and—" She paused. "Everything." Damien nodded. "Good. He's not going to take it well. He'll take it however he takes it. That's his to carry." She turned and went down the last step to the sidewalk and stood there for a moment in the cold afternoon air, with the city moving around her in every direction, indifferent and constant. She felt, underneath the exhaustion and the residue of the last 4 months, and the specific weight of what had just happened in that brownstone, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, possibly not since she was 9 years old, sitting in a car before the rain and the lights and the thing that ended everything. She felt like the ground might hold. She started walking toward the subway. Behind her on the steps, she heard Damien say, "I'll see you tomorrow." "At school," she said, not looking back. "At school," he agreed. She walked half a block before she let herself half smile, quickly, into the collar of her coat where no one could see it and where she did not have to decide yet what it meant. She went home. Her father was in the kitchen. She sat down across from him at the table and put her hands flat on the surface between them and said, "Dad, I need to tell you everything, starting 9 years ago, and I need you to listen until I'm done." He looked at her face. He put down what he was holding. "Okay," he said. She breathed in, 4 count, and she began. She talked for 2 hours and 17 minutes. She knew the duration because the clock on the kitchen wall was directly in her eye line, and she watched it the way you watch a fixed point when everything else is moving. Not because the time mattered, but because having something that didn't change helped her keep going through the parts that were hardest to say. Her father did not interrupt. He had promised he wouldn't, and he kept that promise with the specific effortfulness of a man who wanted very badly to say several things and was choosing, for the first time in a long time, to prioritize someone else's need over his own. She told him about the night she found the messages on his phone. She was 9. She had been looking for a game her friend had mentioned, the kind of game that came preloaded on phones in 2015, and she had found instead a thread of messages between her father and a woman named Victoria that went back 11 months and read the way those things read. Intimate, domestic, the language of 2 people who had built a life inside a secret and furnished it carefully. She told him what she had felt, not the adult reconstructed version of it, not the analyzed and processed version she had developed through months of Thursday sessions, the raw 9-year-old version, which was not anger exactly, more a sensation of the floor dropping, of the specific room she had believed she was living in turning out to have a different geometry than she had understood. She told him what she had said in the car, word for word, because she had replayed it so many thousands of times that the words were more fixed in her memory than almost anything else she knew. "Dad's been texting someone named Victoria. There are a lot of them, going back a long time." She told him about her mother's hands on the wheel. She told him about the sound her mother had made. She told him about the rain and the lights and the glass in her hair and waking up and her mother being gone and 9 years of believing in the part of herself that logic could not reach, that the sequence of those events was a chain of causation that she was the first link of. Her father's face, across the table, went through things she had not seen it go through before and did not have names for and did not try to name. She watched him absorb it and did not look away and did not try to make it easier because Dr. Aldrin had told her in the 6th session, "You have spent 9 years managing other people's ability to tolerate your pain. You don't have to do that anymore." When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Her father had his elbows on the table and his face in his hands. She waited. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red. He had not cried, or had cried briefly, somewhere in the middle when she was describing the car, and had stopped, and the evidence of it was still visible at the edges. "I knew she knew," he said. His voice was different, stripped. "Before the accident, I knew she had figured it out. I was going to tell her that week. I had decided. I was going to come home and tell her the truth and ask her what she needed from me." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I never got the chance." Charlotte looked at him. "It was not your fault," he said. "What you said in the car, it was not the cause. She already knew. She was already—" He stopped again, put his hand flat on the table. "She was already deciding what to do about me. She would have been thinking about it. The accident it wasn't because of what you said." "I know that," Charlotte said. "Do you?" "Logically. I've known it logically for years. And the other way." She held his gaze. "The other way is what the Thursday sessions are for." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I should have gotten you back into therapy years ago. After the 9-year-old sessions ended. I knew you were still struggling and I didn't." He stopped. His voice had done something at the edges, cracked slightly, the specific crack of someone who is facing the exact shape of their own failure and cannot reduce it. "Yes," she said. "You should have." He absorbed that, did not deflect from it. I'm sorry, he said. The two words came out without qualification or context or any of the softening additions that apologies sometimes carry when the person saying them is also trying to manage their own reception of the apology. Just, I'm sorry. She looked at him across the table. She looked at the face that was like hers, the jaw and the eyes and the shoulders, and she thought about Dr. Aldrin saying, forgiveness isn't a decision you make once, it's a practice. You do it over and over, in small increments, and the cumulative effect is what changes things. I know, she said. Not absolution, not the end of it, just I know. I hear you. We are still here on opposite sides of this table, and that is something. Her father looked at his hands. The debt, he said. The Moretti connection. I need to tell you. It's cleared, she said. He looked up. As of this morning, she said, Carver's account shows 0. It's done. He stared at her. How? Vincent Moretti closed it. The silence that followed had a complicated texture, relief and pride and discomfort, all occupying the same space. The specific discomfort of a man who had wanted to handle his own problems and had not, and now had to sit with the shape of that. I don't want to be in debt to... You're not, she said. It was closed as a consequence of something else. Something Greco. Someone in their organization had been running. It was a correction, not a gift. She paused. You're not in debt to anyone. He was quiet for a long time. Charlotte, he said. The boy. Damien. Yes. What is he to you? She thought about the steps of the brownstone, the November air, the single word he had said and everything it carried. Someone I trust, she said. That's not a small thing. For me. You know that. Her father looked at her for a moment. His expression was careful, not disapproving, just careful, the carefulness of a man navigating new territory. He's a Moretti, he said. I know who he is. That comes with... Dad. She held his gaze. I know who he is. I know what that family is. I know it more directly than most people my age. And I know that he specifically is... She stopped, chose the words. He is not his family's worst version of itself. He is something they made that turned out different than they intended. And I understand what that's like. Her father was quiet. Okay, he said finally, not happy with it exactly, but present with it, which was something. She pushed back from the table. I'm going to bed. Charlotte. He stood up when she did. She stopped. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, and he was her father, 51 and tired and guilty and present in the way he had not always been present. And he put his arms around her. She stood for a moment. Then she leaned into it, briefly, the way you allow yourself to lean into something you had learned not to lean into, carefully, testing whether it holds. It held. She went upstairs. She opened the composition notebook. She wrote one sentence. I said it out loud, and it was true before, and it is still true, and I am still here. She closed it. She slept until 7 a.m. and did not dream about the crash. The next 4 months moved differently than the 4 months before them. Not smoothly. Nothing that had been built on that much accumulated weight moved smoothly when it was restructuring. There were bad weeks and worse weeks and weeks that surprised her with their ordinariness. And through all of them, Thursday at 4 remained the fixed point around which the rest organized itself. Dr. Aldrin did not rush her. She was constitutionally incapable of being rushed, which was one of the things Charlotte valued most about her. The specific quality of her patience, which was not passive, not the patience of someone waiting for you to arrive at a destination they had already mapped, but active, genuinely curious about whatever path you were actually taking. In January, Charlotte told her about Damien. All of it. The bathroom floor and the journal and the 6 lines and his father's house and the steps and the November air and the word yes and the words I'll wait. Dr. Aldrin listened without writing anything. Then she said, What do you need before you're ready? Charlotte had thought about this. I need to know that what I feel is mine, not a response to what he did for me, not gratitude, not dependency. How will you know the difference? When I can look at him and feel it and know it doesn't require his protection to exist. She paused. When I can take care of my own ground and still want him there. Dr. Aldrin had nodded. Written something. Said, That's a very clear thing to know about yourself. February. March. The panic attacks did not disappear. They had not been promised they would disappear, so Dr. Aldrin had been precise about this from the beginning, which Charlotte had appreciated more than any false comfort could have provided. What changed was their territory. They became smaller. They became things she moved through rather than things that moved through her. They came less frequently and left faster, and the aftermath of them was exhaustion rather than the particular annihilating shame that had accompanied them for 9 years. She stopped dreaming about the crash every night, then every week, then less than that. At school, the nothing-to-see-here architecture held and also shifted in the way that things shift when both people involved in the shift are aware of it and have agreed, without discussing it, to let it shift at its own pace. The mango juice reappeared on her desk in January without comment. She said nothing about it. He said nothing about it. The fact of it was its own language, ongoing, patient. They talked, not the charged and crisis-driven talking of the fall, ordinary talking, the talking of two people who had seen the worst of each other's circumstances and found that what remained after that was something genuine and durable. She told him about her sessions in general terms. He told her about his father's expectations for him after Blackwood, and she heard in his voice the specific quality of a person who has inherited a future they did not choose and is trying to figure out what is theirs within it. She told him once, in the East Corridor in February, standing near the window where the afternoon light came in gray and thin, "You know you don't have to run it the way he runs it." He looked at her. "What?" "The organization, when it's yours, you don't have to be who he is to hold it." He was quiet for a moment. "That might be idealistic. Probably. But you're already different from what they made. That's evidence." He had looked at her with something that was not quite the stillness, and was not quite the thing beneath it, some third thing she was still learning to read. "Evidence," he said. "You've been leaving mango juice on my desk for 4 months," she said. "That's not the behavior of someone without access to their own," she gestured, "softer material." Something that was actually a smile moved across his face. Brief, real. "Softer material," he said. "I'm being clinical," she said. "You're really not," he said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. Spring arrived the way spring arrived in New York. Abruptly, between 1 week and the next, the temperature shifting with the specific drama of a city that had been cold long enough to have lost patience with it. The trees on the campus path went from bare to green in what felt like a single overnight decision. The light changed. The quality of air through open windows changed. Charlotte went 3 weeks without a panic attack, then 4. Then, in the first week of May, she sat in Dr. Aldrin's office and said, "It's been 6 weeks." Dr. Aldrin looked at her across the small table. "How does that feel?" "Strange," Charlotte said honestly, "like waiting for the other shoe." "Does the shoe need to drop?" She considered this. "No, but I've been expecting it to for so long that the absence of it requires adjustment." "That's an accurate description of recovery," Dr. Aldrin said. "The thing people don't tell you is that getting better has its own disorientation. You built architecture around the wound. When the wound changes, the architecture needs to come down, and that feels like loss even when it isn't." Charlotte sat with that. "I've been thinking about what I want to do," she said. "After, school, career. The thing I want to do." "Tell me." "Trauma work. Clinical. I want to be the person in the room that I needed when I was 9 and didn't have." She paused. I know there are easier paths." "Easier for who?" Dr. Aldrin said. Charlotte looked at her. "Easier for who?" Dr. Aldrin said again, not rhetorically. "For me," Charlotte said. "Staying away from it, not working in it, not spending every professional day inside the thing that almost—" She stopped. "Almost what?" She had never said the next part out loud. Not in 17 Thursday sessions. She said it now. "There were periods when I was 14, 15, when the attacks were very frequent and I wasn't sleeping and I hadn't told anyone and I was very tired." She kept her voice level. "I'm not saying I was planning anything. I'm saying I was very tired of being inside it, and I understand from the inside what that specific tiredness feels like. And I think that's something. In a room with someone who needs help, to understand that tiredness from the inside. Dr. Aldrin was looking at her with the quality of attention Charlotte had stopped finding unsettling somewhere around week 8. "Yes," Dr. Aldrin said quietly. "It is something." They sat together for a moment in the office that had held 60-something hours of the most difficult things Charlotte had ever said, and the late afternoon light came through the window at the angle it came at in May, different from November, warmer, more golden, the kind of light that was not symbolic and was also, unavoidably, exactly what it looked like. "I want to tell you something," Dr. Aldrin said, "professionally. You came in here at 17 having managed a significant trauma disorder alone for 9 years. What you've done in the months since is not typical, not in terms of pace or depth." She paused. "You're going to be very good at this, if you go into it. You're going to be very good at it because you know what it costs, and you did it anyway." Charlotte looked at the window. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges. She did not try to smooth it. Graduation was the first week of June. Blackwood Preparatory Academy's graduation ceremony occupied the main courtyard, which had been arranged with chairs and a temporary stage, and the specific ambient sound of 300 families collectively processing the end of something and the beginning of something else. The afternoon was warm and clear, the sky the unambiguous blue of early summer. Charlotte wore her gown and walked across the stage when her name was called and accepted her diploma from the headmaster's hand and felt, when she turned and looked out at the assembled families, not the surge of completion she had expected, but something quieter. A small, solid thing, more like an acknowledgement than a triumph. She had gotten here. The path to here had been the path it had been. Both of those things were true simultaneously. Her father was in this 4th row. He waved. She had spent the last 6 months reconstructing something with him. Not the relationship they had had before, which had been built on incomplete foundations and had collapsed under its own structural flaws, but something new, built on the actual ground between them, with all the topography accurately mapped. It was slower work than she had expected and more possible than she had feared. Victoria was sitting beside him. Charlotte and Victoria had not resolved into warmth, would probably not resolve into warmth, had arrived instead at a kind of honest distance that was better than performed closeness. Victoria had said, in February, standing in the kitchen, the two of them accidentally alone for 10 minutes, "I know I'm not who you would have chosen." Charlotte had looked at her and said, "No, but you're who's here." And that had been, somehow, enough. Not enough for everything, but enough for a functional household, which was what they were. And naming it accurately had made living in it easier. Her father had enrolled in his own therapy in March. She had not suggested it. He had mentioned it one morning over coffee in the careful tone of a man doing something that required him to override significant amounts of conditioning. She had said good and meant it. After the ceremony, in the reception hour in the main hall, she was standing near the window with a glass of water when Damien found her. He was in his graduation gown, which he wore with the same quality of inhabiting clothing that he wore everything, as though clothes were simply a variable he had processed and set aside so he could pay attention to more interesting things. His family was somewhere in the room. She could feel Vincent Moretti's presence as a quality of the room's ambient air pressure without needing to identify his specific location. He stood beside her at the window, not facing her. Both of them looking out at the courtyard where the chairs were already being moved by the facilities staff, the ceremony's infrastructure dismantled with brisk efficiency. "How does it feel?" he said. "Strange," she said. "Everything lately feels strange. Strange like wrong or strange like different?" She considered. "Different, like the room I thought I was in turns out to have more space than I knew." He was quiet for a moment. "I got into Columbia," he said. "Pre-law. I told my father this morning." She turned to look at him. "What did he say?" "He said it was a reasonable choice." A pause. "Which from him is significant." "What did you want him to say?" He looked at the courtyard. "I wanted him to say he was proud, but that's not—" He stopped, started again. "I know who he is. I know what he's capable of saying and what he isn't. The reasonable choice was as close as he gets, and I've decided that's enough." She looked at him. She thought about February in the corridor. You don't have to be who he is to hold it. She thought about the months between then and now, the slow accumulation of small evidence that the person standing beside her was constructing himself, deliberately and against significant friction, towards something that was his own rather than merely inherited. NYU, she said. Psychology. I'm going to specialize in trauma work. He turned to look at her. Dr. Aldrin's field, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's going to be hard. I know. You're going to be good at it. Dr. Aldrin says the same thing. Then you should probably believe it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. The main hall moved around them with the sounds of graduation, voices, the clink of glasses, the specific happiness of families assembled around the end of something. And they stood beside the window in the middle of it and looked at each other. She had known, since sometime in March, what the answer was. She had known it with the clarity she had described to Dr. Aldrin, the kind that didn't require his protection to exist, the kind that was hers, that belonged to her specifically, and would continue to exist regardless of what he did with it. She had carried it for 3 months the way you carry something you've decided is real, but haven't yet said out loud, testing it, checking it against the light at different angles. She was done testing it. I'm ready, she said. He looked at her. He understood what she meant. She could see that he understood, in the quality of stillness that was not the old stillness, not defensive or controlled, but the stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time and is now, in this moment, completely present with the thing that has arrived. Yeah, he said, not a question. Yeah, she said. He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with the urgency of someone who had been waiting and was now claiming something. Just his hand, finding hers, settling there with a naturalness that had been earned through months of the slowest and most painstaking kind of work. The work of two people learning to be present with each other without managing the presence, without the distance, without the nothing-to-see-here architecture. She let her fingers close around his. Her father saw it from across the room. She knew because she looked up and found him looking, and watched his face move through several things and settle, finally, on something that was not easy and was not comfortable and was, she thought, probably something close to genuine. He raised his glass slightly. A small thing. Hers to interpret. She looked back at Damien. What happens now? She said. Now we graduate, he said, and then we figure out the rest. That's not very specific. I know. He looked at her. Is that okay? She thought about 9 years of trying to control every variable, to manage every approach, to know the shape of what was coming before it arrived. She thought about what happened every time she had tried to hold the ground alone versus the specific quality of the ground when she let someone stand on it with her. Yes, she said. That's okay. They stood at the window with their hands together, and the June afternoon coming in gold through the glass, and the room moved around them with the ordinary sounds of lives, intersecting and diverging and continuing, and she stood inside it and breathed and felt the ground hold. Years later, when Charlotte Whitmore was Dr. Charlotte Whitmore and had her own office with its own window and its own quality of stillness that her patients told her felt different from other offices. Something steadier, they said, something that didn't require them to manage their own discomfort before they could speak. She kept one thing on her desk that was not clinical, not professional, not part of the official architecture of the space. A composition notebook. Not the original. The original 14 were in a box in the closet of the apartment she shared with Damien, who was by then running the legitimate enterprises of the Moretti organization with a specificity and a carefulness that was his father's in form and his own in content, and who had established, quietly and without announcement, a policy regarding the non-institutional creditors who had once called her father on a Wednesday night and moved a deadline to Friday. A policy that his father had reviewed and not objected to, which was, from Vincent Moretti, as close to approval as anything got. The notebook on her desk was new. She filled a new one every year. Her patients sometimes asked about it, and she told them, "It's where I put the things I know logically but can't get to the other way yet." Some of them laughed, recognizing the gap between those two kinds of knowing. Some of them cried, which was fine, which was the point of a room like this. On the foundation they had established, the two of them, the Moretti organization's first charitable arm. They built a clinic. Free trauma services for adolescents. The waiting list was never 14 months. Dr. Aldrin consulted on the model, initially because Charlotte had asked, and later because she found she wanted to, which was its own kind of answer about the work Charlotte had done. They called it the Whitmore Foundation, which was Charlotte's decision. Damien had suggested Moretti. She had looked at him and said, "The money is yours. The name is mine." He had looked back at her for a moment and then said, "Fair," which was the correct response, and also very him. And she had loved him for it in the particular way she had come to love him for the specific and accurate responses. Not the large gestures, not the carried her through the hallway moments, though those were theirs too, permanently, but the small and accurate responses that a person only gives when they are genuinely paying attention. She was in her office on a Thursday afternoon in November, years after graduation, when her last patient of the day left and she sat in the quiet of the room and looked at the window and breathed. In, hold, out. Not because she needed to, not because something was rising that required management, just because the habit had been with her for so long that it had stopped being a coping mechanism and become simply a way of being present in her own body, a way of saying, "Here, I'm here, still here." She had not had a panic attack in 3 years. Not because the machinery that produced them had been dismantled. Dr. Aldrin had been honest about that from the beginning, had told her the machinery would always be there, built in the months after the crash when her 9-year-old brain was trying to protect her from a world that had just proven it could take everything in a moment. But because the machinery no longer ran on the fuel it had run on for 9 years. The fuel had been the secret. The fuel had been the aloneness of it, the specific suffocation of carrying the true thing inside a container that no one else could see. She had said the true things out loud, over and over, in different rooms, to different people, each time finding that the saying did not break the thing it named, but instead made the named thing smaller. Not gone, not painless, but smaller, proportionate, something she could carry alongside rather than underneath. She picked up her phone. Damien had texted an hour ago. "Home by 7. There's mango juice in the fridge." She looked at that for a moment. She thought about a girl on a bathroom floor who had believed, in her darkest and most exhausted stretches, that the best she could hope for was invisibility. The managed, careful, never let them see it invisibility of someone who had decided that survival and concealment were the same thing. She thought about how wrong that had been, and how long it had taken to learn that it was wrong, and how the learning had required, at every step, the particular courage of saying the true thing out loud in a room where she was not sure it would be held. She texted back, "I'll be home by 6:30. Then she put the phone in her bag, put on her coat, picked up the composition notebook from her desk, and turned off the lamp. The office went dim. The window held the last of the November light. The same gray and gold of the November light that had come through the study room window years ago, while she breathed and counted and told Damien Moretti for the first time that she had been carrying something alone. She stood in the dim office for a moment. She breathed in, held it, let it go. Then she opened the door, walked into the hallway, and went home.